Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to podcast the storm of socially awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds and being talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the authenticator, Dolphin L. Mortimer.
Good evening, everyone. It's going to. It was kind of a slow week, so we're taking the opportunity to play catch up.
And I am your host last time. I want to be there, but it's all pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I am okay, mostly.
Yeah, I had dinner. I'm doing fine as well. Been somewhat of an uneventful week, to be fully honest. And yeah, uh, I took a good nap before I came off before we started, so
Hmm.
rested and
I
ready.
haven't really eaten yet. I had some yogurt earlier, but I will eat after the
To be
show.
fair, don't when you ever you don't really eat much. Now that I think about it.
No, but I'm also a fairly small person, so I don't really need that much food.
Oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, so we're playing catch up, and the first thing on our list is something I always hate talking about. Um, is
Avast, the white whale approaches.
um, in plain sight how white supremacy, misogyny, and hate targeted Star Wars sequel trilogy. It's the rewriting Ripley article, and for the sake of clarity and just so we're not lost, I did back it up a bit so we could have some context.
Mhm. And for those wondering why we're starting on like part 8 of a
10.
extremely lengthy article, there's an entire playlist on the channel entitled Rewriting Ripley article, wherein we've covered this for like an hour at a time. So if
Yeah,
if you if you are missing context, go there and catch up.
yeah. Actually, give me a second because I want to check. I could have sworn we've done this like 10 times already. It sounds to me that I've said that.
Yep, yep. And the first time I think it took up the entire show, which was like 4 hours.
Oh my
So
god.
and and out of basically nothing but sanity, we restricted all the other instances to an hour each. So so think of just how much wrong must be contained in this goddamn.
Oh, we have no 14. Sorry, 14 videos.
Yeah.
I might actually drink this all over.
Yeah, which means we have devoted 18 hours of our life to this, to debunking this fucking cacophonous dissertation of wrong.
Um, yeah, I think okay. So yeah, like I said, I did back it up a bit so we could have some context. All right.
You realize that probably by the end of this article, we'll have enough material that if someone felt like it, they could literally spend an entire 24-hour day doing nothing but watching a response to this thing.
I would ask you not for basically just your own sanity.
I mean, yes, space it out for your own good, but the point is that probably by the end of this whole thing, we will have 24 hours literally of material.
Right. Anyway, that's not Dilly Dally.
Mhm.
It can be argued that small but concentrated hashtags like these have been successful, while hashtag campaigns have no real impact on the box office, they can impact the narrative. Esquire points out in its 2018 article that after the release of Solo, Disney completely refocused its future plans. While it would be a stretch to imagine the trolls directly affected the direction of a multi-billion-dollar franchise, there's no denying that the executives at Disney have taken note of this narrative.
Okay, my friend, my well, no, not my friend, my dear pseudo-intellectual fucktard. Um, Here's the thing. You don't have to believe in any narratives of any kind whatsoever to notice the simple fact that there is this thing we call drastically diminishing returns from movie to movie. Starting with Force Awakens, it was like $1.4 billion. Then Last Jedi was, I believe, or was it even 1.2? I want to say it was. I want to say it was even lower than that. Then Rogue One was 1.1, and then Solo was an outright bomb, and Rise of Skywalker um, barely crossed $1 billion. And actually, come to think of it, I think Force Awakens was actually 2.4, not 1.4. So that means that from one movie to another movie, it literally the box office got cut in half with comparable investments and comparable marketing and um comparable. Basically, what we have here is an all other things being equal situation, which is an economics term that I don't remember the fancy Latin for, but nevertheless, in economics, there's this notion of all other things being equal. And all other things being equal, meaning accounting for all the other extraneous variables, Last Jedi made roughly half what Force Awakens did, and Solo bombed outright, and all the other Star Wars movies made even less than that. So, regardless of whether you want to call the grassroots fan base trolls or not, fuck you, by the way, but even if you want to go there, you don't have to know anything about these narratives, quote unquote, to notice the fact that there's drastically diminishing returns from movie to movie. And this did not happen with even the prequel movies. Even though the prequel movies had a similar fan backlash to them around the same time, albeit a less potent one, we can therefore conclude that this goes far and above, or rather far beyond, even ordinary fan resentment. And when you consider the fact that Rian Johnson went out of his way to admit that he wanted to create a Star Wars movie that was thematically antithetical to the Star Wars mythos in the Star Wars universe, and that Kathleen Kennedy went out of her way to insert feminism and social justice into every nook and cranny of the franchise whenever possible, we can therefore conclude that even the shoddy making of the movies that were the prequel trilogy are less toxic to the overall bottom line than the mixture of deconstructionist postmodernism out of spite for the fan base and social justice in place of anything meritocratic were. Moving on.
Right. Solo is the only Star Wars movie considered to be a flop. It released in theaters several weeks after the highly successful Avengers event Infinity War, which can impact enthusiasm for a movie. It is highly likely to have considerable audience overlap. Disney's former CEO Bob Iger has stated that Solo's performance was due to releasing the film too quickly.
Okay, if both were good, that wouldn't have been a factor. because we have seen many, many cases where multiple movies in a given year have been able to make $1 billion or $2 billion with minimal to no effort. In fact, if both were considered well liked, what you would have seen is a phenomena which colloquially is referred to a rising tide raising all ships. I.e., if people who liked Infinity War, of which there were many, many, millions and possibly billions of people, also were hyped to see Solo, then you would have seen a overlap in their audiences, and therefore Solo would have made at least a sizable proportion of what Infinity War made. You did not see that, however, because irrespective of what the critics thought in their ivory towers, or their metaphoric ivory towers, I guess I should say, audiences did not like Solo: A Star Wars Story, and went out of their way to demonstrate this by abstaining from seeing it. And many people who otherwise probably would have at least seen Solo once and therefore increased the box office at least somewhat, probably didn't because of the aforementioned meddling of Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy, wherein they as good as said they don't care about Star Wars as an IP, and they in fact wanted to subvert it and weaponize it at every given turn. That is the fan resentment that requires no narrative to demonstrate, because people in a world where we have access to the internet and everyone can upload opinions of theirs however they like, whether it's in text or whether it's in video form, will as good as tell you that's why they didn't like seeing the thing. And what I find fascinating is you can look at people saying to you, this is why I don't like it. And you can insinuate from inside your academic framework that those people don't know enough about the mechanics of their own minds to come to a rational conclusion about their own opinions. And therefore you can insert some pseudo-intellectual gobbledygook about how even though that's why people said they didn't like a thing, they don't know what's going on in their own heads as well as you do, apparently. Moving on.
Yeah, okay. Another problem with the Han Solo origin film is it didn't quite know who it was for. The crowd clamoring for nostalgia and a taste of 1977 missing important factors like Harrison Ford playing the iconic character in an origin story about a character who was in his prime in the 70s and 80s wasn't necessarily appealing to new fans who have been brought in by the sequel trilogy.
Okay, hold that thought. The idea that the movie didn't quite know who it was for. And now, what I want you to do, sir, is click and drag that sentiment, that sentiment of the movie not really knowing who it's for, and then take another look at the sequel trilogy and the aforementioned halving of the box office almost in a exponential progression. Because if you are capable of understanding the notion of a movie not really knowing who it's for negatively impacting the movie, then I am going to once again reacquaint you to the fan backlash. Because what the fan backlash demonstrates, underneath all the narrative gobbledygook and the virtue-flavored lies that you keep spinning about it, is that it's highly probable that the Star Wars sequel trilogy, by and large, didn't know who its audience was. And we can be fairly certain about that because the two largest influences on the creative direction of the Star Wars franchise, that being Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy, as good as said that in Rian Johnson's case, he wanted to turn the Star Wars franchise thematically on its head and subvert expectations as much as he possibly could. And Kathleen Kennedy as much as said, as she was using Star Wars as a vehicle for the phenomena we call social justice. Therefore, we can conclude from this that those movies, the movies wherein those two factors were most evident, didn't know who their audience was for either. And in so doing, it is perfectly reasonable for the fan base that actually does like Star Wars as it is and doesn't want it to be subverted or weaponized in the name of a political ideology, would be annoyed at that. And therefore, it doesn't require any appeal to any sort of racism or the alt-right, not that you know how to define that fucking phrase, or any sort of other political gobbledygook. I.e., you don't need the political gobbledygook to understand what you just briefly alluded to there in a minor moment of sanity, that the sequel trilogy did not know who its audience was for, and because I feel like holding your hand and driving you to a correct position, I'm going to allow you to say that. I'm going to allow you to say that the Star Wars sequel trilogy didn't know who it was for, and then I am going to force you to follow that logic to the fact that Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy not only didn't know who the Star Wars franchise was for, but went out of their way to actively spite what their audience wanted and what their audience expected from the IP. And it was this affront, this active spiting of fan loyalty and fan engagement, that resulted in the vast majority of the anger directed at the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Because in addition to not knowing who their audience was for, it seems that to whatever degree Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson knew what the IP was for or who the IP was for, they went out of their way to actively invert those things. They went out of their way to distance themselves from their own fan base, and their own fan base reacted rather rationally to being spited by being angry at being spited. Because when you tell your customers, or in very uncertain terms, we don't want you, we want a better audience, go the fuck away, unsurprisingly, the audience gets somewhat mad at you with no need to appeal to any sort of racism or sexism or any other pseudo-political gobbledygook. Moving on.
Alright, sorry, I was taking a drink of water.
Mm-hmm.
However, instead of reflecting on how to balance the value of nostalgia and the need to branch out into new and growing movie-going demographics, it appeared that Solo box office was being blamed on hate against The Last Jedi. Shortly after the release of the film, headlines began to ask, is Last Jedi the reason fans are sticking to Solo? These articles reported on how its Twitter activity, where he retweeted and interacted, but several tweets suggested that the ban on Solo was due to the hate of The Last Jedi. This narrative was likely impacted by Twitter users in the Boycott Solo hashtag campaign.
Yes, and this has been known since long before all this political narrative bullshit came into the conversation. If you make a bad addition to a franchise, the next edition of the franchise, even if it's good, will suffer some negative repercussions from the fact that the previous movie in the franchise was bad, or at least perceived as bad. Now, you can make the argument that Solo was good enough to counteract this, but again, the numbers don't lie. So even if you would prefer that Solo was good enough to counteract this effect, the numbers would suggest you are wrong. And then you go into the fact that Solo wasn't all that good in and of itself. So even without the specter of Last Jedi hanging over it, it probably still would have underperformed as far as Star Wars movies go, because it wasn't good on its own merits. So when you combine these two things of the previous movie in the franchise wasn't all that good, and the movie itself wasn't all that good, you wind up in a situation where the box office does what we actually see it did, and the movie historically bombs. Because, yes, to some degree, Solo's box office was a referendum on The Last Jedi, as was the fact that Last Jedi made little bit less than half of what the origin of what Force Awakens did. A little bit over half of a IP's audience disappearing is normally a pretty solid indication that something clearly went wrong. But no, never mind. It's not simple economics. It's not people who like an IP reacting rationally to the quality dip in that IP. It must be this arbitrary moral and socio-political woo, because that's the only way we ivory tower prigs can make sense of things anymore. Funny how that works. Moving on.
Okay, now we're caught up. So the idea that Disney's bottom line was now being severely impacted by Last Jedi case was also spread by influential reactionary right-wing and alt-right accounts. In the top tweets mentioned Last Jedi in 2018, a few tweets about Solo's box office results. D-Day Cobra on his since suspended account tweeted, "Why Solo failed? Number one, The Last Jedi. Number two, Lucasfilm's blind denial of The Last Jedi backlash. Number three, Lucasfilm's attack on the fans. Number four, Ryan Johnson is an asshole. Number five, Kathleen Kennedy. Number six, identity politics. Nobody wanting this film was a reason, but it's the least relevant reason."
Yeah. While that's a bit summarizing and a little bit flamboyant, he's not wrong. Those are perfectly verifiable reasons as to why Solo didn't do well. It wasn't good. The previous movie in the franchise wasn't good. The people behind the movies actively tried to spite their own fan base in the name of finding a new and better one, and they refused to acknowledge what the numbers that they were getting from these various projects were indicating, even though large swaths of the fan base were going out of their way to tell them as such. When we tell you what you're doing wrong, and you either try to ignore that we told you that, or come up with some cockamamie moralistic bullshit about how we're all evil for thinking you did anything wrong, that's only going to incense people more, my friend. Sorry to burst that bubble, but yes, if you go out of your way to spite your own fan base or your own customer base, and then when your spite inevitably backfires, as spite is wont to do, you either ignore the backlash or you make up some cockamamie moralistic bullshit as to how it's not actually the very obvious thing that it is, but it is in fact this overly elaborate socio-political gobbledygook that you will then spend several dozen pages going on and on about in a pseudo-intellectual dissertation fashion. It's going to piss people off, do you see? But fortunately for you, there are those of us who will go through the trouble of reading through the entire goddamn thing and debunking or offering a counterpoint to every last absurd, fear-mongering, hysterical, moralizing bullshit piece of pseudo-intellectual claptrap that you can spew out in said dissertation. Sadly enough, I think we are the only people who view this goddamn thing anymore, and we're probably also the only people who actually bothered to read through the entire thing. But somebody has to do it, so we'll do it. Not to mention, we're already 18 hours worth of material into this thing, and my pride will not let me stop going. So there.
But I think you had to drag me into this.
Someone had to explain in great detail why this person was wrong, and why all the effort he spent 3 years putting into it was wasted and counterproductive. Plus, he kept misusing terminology and it made my brain want to explode.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Hmm.
Hey, Dragon Turtle. I need to start setting an alarm for the stream or something. Oh, guys, sorry for being late again. No, you're good. Honestly, I'll be honest, I wish you got here an hour later because I do not, I hate covering this and I don't like people listening to us cover this. That's how much I hate this article.
Basically, Dragon Turtle. This article we are covering now is our white whale. We return to it every time there's not something more topical to cover. It's the rewriting Ripley Star Wars white supremacy article from about 2020. I want to say it was
2021, I checked.
Yeah, okay. Basically, this is the pseudo-intellectual academic answer to why the powers that be think the backlash towards The Last Jedi happened. And as you can imagine, it involves a lot of not defining terms properly, moralizing hysteria, and sociopolitical gobbledygook that makes no fucking sense.
Anyway, we gotta keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Shapiro also passed similar sentiment around Twitter, claiming that the biggest problem with Solo is that Disney was so badly with The Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Okay, and here's the full quote, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just don't see the point covering like the images and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And moving on. It's difficult to say for sure if any executives at Disney or still believe that Solo's full box office was due to alleged backlash of The Last Jedi, but it did become a narrative online regardless.
I hate to burst your bubble, sir, but you do realize that just because you can't make sense of it in your ivory tower doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This actually is fundamentally the origin of all of this bullshit, frankly. You need to come to terms with the fact that just because you don't think certain people are valid doesn't mean they in turn don't have an impact on the real world. I.e., things exist beyond your control and people exist outside of your framework. And no amount of moralistically shaming people who exist outside of your framework is going to convince them to stop. Because, again, no matter how much you morally shame the world is not going to go away. And when people rise up as an organic reaction to an IP being so drastically mismanaged and so spitefully marketed that it essentially tells them all to go fuck off, you can't just morally shame them and assume everyone around every goddamn corner is a Nazi who's secretly out to get you. Especially when the people in question actively tell you what the problem is and you just refuse to engage with any of their actual criticism because you would rather believe that you know what's going on in their heads better than they do. Even while constantly misusing the term alt-right, which again, for the 500th time most likely, the alt-right is a tiny, meaningless, collapsed collection of pseudo-intellectual dude bros who are an offshoot of an offshoot of an offshoot of 2017 skeptic community, and they are all but a joke. Every single last one of them. Richard Spencer is viewed with roughly the same amount of mocking derision as a Disney cartoon villain who is supposed to be written as incompetent. Like, seriously. Richard Spencer, John Francois, Gary P., Baked Alaska, all the rest of the notable, and by notable, I mean notable in the least, in the least actually meaningfully notable way possible. But all of the actual notable alt-right figures, what few there are all regarded as essentially essentially pseudo-intellectual, college-educated, lacrosse-playing hipster douches LARPing as Nazis, basically. And every single one of them is so incompetent that Disney cartoon villains probably could beat them up and take their lunch money. Anyway, moving on.
Lack of education about the dangers of online conversation. Biggest reason why politically driven hate can spread so easily is simply a lack of education about how internet spaces work. For starters, it's important to understand that everything you experience online cannot be used to discuss the opinions of the population. Internet spaces are specifically tailored to you, whether that be the opinions you see on Twitter, the ads you see on Facebook, or searches you see on Google.
Why is it that you understand that, or at least kind of understand that, with regards to the allegedly right-wing perspective, but you don't seem to understand that with movements like Antifa or BLM or any hashtag campaigns that have a left-wing slant to them? If you are now going the "my Twitter is not real life" argument, which in and of itself is somewhat arguable, but that's neither here nor there. If you understand the "my Twitter isn't real life" argument, when it comes to the straw man to hell and back version of your opposition that you don't like, why is it that when it comes to someone like Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, um, Kathleen Kennedy herself, um, the the various and sundry social justice warriors that started all of this back in 2013 and were opposed by Gamergate and then went on to be opposed by people like Comicsgate and the Phantom Menace? Why is it that their opinions are unquestionably reflective of the real world, no matter how obviously wrong they are at every given turn, but you can't even begin to imagine how anyone on Twitter or YouTube could ever be reflective of reality or the grassroots opinions of people when it's something you disagree with? Because here's the thing. Either both of these segments of people are outliers within outliers, or we have to contend with the fact that they are both existent things. And if they are both existent things, then we have to actually look at their arguments in good faith, i.e., without strawmanning them to hell and back or assuming things about what they're saying rather than actually addressing what they're actually saying, or we can ignore both of them. Frankly, it would almost be worth ignoring the actual grassroots of the fan base if it also meant ignoring the SJWs. But as we just went over, you will never universalize your principles. You will never ignore both the red and black flag waving Antifa members, or the BLM activists, or the intersectional feminists, or even the TERFs. But you will ignore literally everyone who has a problem with The Last Jedi, regardless of their political affiliations. Also, once again, you have made the mistake of conflating what you think people mean and what they actually claimed or acted in favor of acting in a way that would imply they actually mean things. I.e., there is a difference between the thing in itself to be analyzed and your analysis of it. You have once again pulled this pseudo-intellectual trick where you will examine something, create a supposition about that thing, and then act as though your supposition is inviolably correct and act as though it is the original position, completely ignoring the thing you were originally analyzing that led you to that conclusion in the first place. Moving on. Bless you.
Thank you. Oh. Oh, that hurt my esophagus. Okay, sorry. Okay. There is a time where the more time you spend online, the less informed you become about the truth. It's one where YouTube and Facebook are common places for Americans to get news, which are often from misleading or incorrect sources. Now, understanding the tech control around online spaces can make it easier for organized groups to manipulate a narrative. The view bombing or mass downvoting are two common examples.
Okay, you haven't actually demonstrated how any of their information was incorrect. You only asserted that it was so, and then offered your ideological counter to it. Which I suppose fair enough because that's been a lot of what I've been doing, but I've been doing it mostly because your ideological suppositions rely upon moralizing hysteria and pseudo intellectual gobbledygook that doesn't follow directly from any of the evidence you've been showing. Whereas my suppositions have mostly been based on a reasonable standard of human behavior that doesn't rely on everyone being mustache twirling villains or um, slack jawed hillbillies or both. Which your your supposition, like so many of your academic types, seems to be that everyone who disagrees with you doesn't disagree with you for any meritocratic reasons. They simply disagree with you for moral and sociopolitical reasons, and or because they are either mustache twirling villains or slack-jawed hicks, and usually both. Moving on.
Okay. The mass downvoting alt-right groups often organize on YouTube to downvote videos that are threats to their political agenda. For example, in April 2020, people in alt-right conspiracy communities attacked an ad for the Microsoft HoloLens augmented reality headset. The ad featured Marina and Abramovic. I'm sorry if I said her name wrong. I'm terrible with names. And her
Again, the
experience
alt.
utilizing AR tech.
Go ahead. Sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah,
Moving on.
yeah. Sorry, I'm terrible with names. Okay.
Mhm.
Let me start over. The ad featured artist Marina Ambrovic and her experience utilizing AR tech to bring her art to life. And the ad caught the attention of conspiracy networks who believe Ambrovic to be a Satanist connected to politicians who drink children's blood in popular QAnon conspiracies. The ad was bombed with 24,000 dislikes. What the
Okay,
fuck?
again, my friends, the alt right, the actual like meaningfully call themselves the alt right, don't don't even contain that many members. The world over, they don't contain that many members because the actual alt right mostly revolved around two figures: Richard Spencer and John Francois Gary P. The alt right is not a synonym for any right wing perspective that goes against the establishment and therefore is an alternative. The term alt right was coined in 2017 or thereabouts by people like Richard Spencer and John Francois Gary P. to denote themselves as a spin off of the anti SJW movement of the time, because unlike most of the other anti SJWs of roundabout 2017 era, the alt right are the ones that decided identity politics is good, actually, we just need it for white people. And funnily enough, the minute people like JF Gary P and Richard Spencer did that, they were laughed at by all but a tiny, tiny minority within a minority within a minority of people. Because they were all, to a man, childish, dick-headed, wannabe cartoon supervillain morons. My point is that you don't know how that term is defined, and you seem to be using it as any right-wing perspective or even assumed right-wing perspective that might be defined as an alternative, when that has never been, in the entire history of that phrase, what it meant by people who actually applied it to themselves or other people organically. There aren't enough people within the alt-right to organize a boycott like that, because the alt-right is an irrelevant fraction of a fraction of a fraction of people who in turn tend to infight like motherfuckers, because they're all narcissistic wannabe Napoleons who actually believe that they are competent enough to take over the world, even while having a um even while having a audience base that only makes up about 7,000 people each. If you were actually aware of what the actual alt-right was, I'm 90% sure you would realize how stupid all the rest of this sounds. Because you are if I am to take you by what these words actually mean, if I was to take you by what these words actually mean, you would be basically trying to rewrite the entirety of the world for fear of maybe 7,000 people, led by a preppy douchebag wannabe lacrosse player who was so incompetent that he was recorded screaming about Jews after Charlottesville. And he sounded even more incompetent than Jack Spicer, Dr. Draken, or the Dark Lord Chuckles the Silly Frickin' Piggy. Those are all Disney Channel intentionally written as incompetent supervillains, in case anyone didn't get the reference. But anyway, moving on.
When Microsoft also removes the ad, alt-right YouTubers like the Quartering were quick to make videos celebrating this successful takedown.
The quartering is not alt-right. Not at all. He has, as far as I can tell, no racial opinions whatsoever. And good for him. Race is irrelevant. Utterly and completely irrelevant. This is the main problem. You look at people who say race is irrelevant, and you cannot seem to internalize that that is what they actually said to you. You assume, by default, that the only reason someone would be claiming that race is irrelevant is because they don't like your politics on race and want to substitute it with racist politics of their own. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, or actually, no, I love to burst your bubble, because this actually would result in you having a more positive opinion of humanity at large if you understood that when most people say, I view race as irrelevant, they mean race is a freaking relevant. They do not mean, I don't like your identity politics, I want to substitute my own. There are such people that say that, but again, they are a fractious minority within a fractious minority within a fractious minority of people, and to a man, viewed as childish, dangerous incompetence, who are honestly too preoccupied with their own narcissism to ever be a threat to anything. Unless, of course, the media goes out of their way to make those figures relevant because, and only because, they studied for one exam and reality didn't provide that one exam, so they are looking for any examples of the enemy they actually studied to fight, even though they are essentially not even man children, they're man toddlers. J.F. Garapi and Richard Spencer are the most childish, dick-headed morons probably currently extant on the face of the earth, with very minimal exaggeration on my part. Moving on.
Okay. Mass downvoting tends to target women of color, for example, in February of this year, I guess 2021. Alt-right racist mass downvoted videos in a Black Creativity in STEM playlist on YouTube. Mass downvoting affected several creators that month, especially those who end up on YouTube's homepage. This tactic has been used in Star Wars fandom as well to download videos from women of color and trans people of color that have been uploaded to the official Star Wars channel.
Okay, again.
The goal. Sorry, let me finish. Let me read this.
Right, okay. Go ahead. Finish the thing and then
The goal of this downvoting is to either increase harassment against the people in the video or to get the video removed entirely.
Okay. Let me pick apart all the things you just said, which are categorically wrong. Okay. Thing one. If the material that these companies put out happen to feature people of different demographics that you would prefer be socially protected, here's the thing. The fact that most people don't regard identity as something to care about at all means that that they don't either get specially targeted or specially lionized, and that's the problem. In modern academia, it seems to be that certain demographics of people are protected classes. Therefore, never mind not being discriminated against, for they already passed that barrier with flying colors. But they actually have to be discriminated on the behalf of and given special treatment. What you are seeing there is not racism or sexism or otherwise, sirs, or actually I think you are a dude that wrote this article, but sir, who wrote this article. What you're seeing there is not racism or sexism or anything else relating to identity. What you're seeing there is people categorically refusing to give people of certain identity demographics special treatment. And when anyone else of a non-protected demographic, according to you, does something that is incompetent, counterproductive, and actively spiteful to the consumers they're trying to appeal to, they get criticized viscerally and vehemently. And there is nothing wrong with that. The problem you're seeing is that you would prefer people in those protected classes of yours be treated better than the demographics that you basically consider to be scum of the earth, which frankly is mostly men. Let's not beat around the bush about it. But this is the thing. You don't think that women of any demographic, or especially women of color or trans women of color, should be regarded with the exact same amount of contempt when they fuck up as men, especially white men. But that's the thing. When someone actually looks at a given thing, not in terms of identity, but in terms of meritocracy, and they notice incompetence and stupidity occurring, regardless of the person's identity, they are well within their right, as someone who doesn't give a fuck about identity, to treat them with exactly the same amount of contempt, regardless of their identity, as they would any other demographic. But you define not giving special treatment to certain demographics as hatred towards those demographics. Meanwhile, never considering the fact of how you treat the non-protected demographics, and how therefore, if you define that kind of criticism as hate, you criticize, you quote unquote hate non-protected demographics with a passion that burns like the white-hot intensity of 1,000 suns. But never mind. Most people are willing to treat everyone unvarnishedly the same in the space of meritocracy. But meritocracy can be a harsh mistress, you see, because if you have no merits, you will get screamed at for not having any merits, especially when you're blowing billions of dollars displaying for all the world your lack of merits. People are going to be actively spiteful towards that, especially when the IP in question has a high standard of merit that it previously lived up to and now is no longer. So regardless of the identities of the people being criticized, they will get criticized not because people have some sort of moralistic hate boner, but because they have a anti-meritocratic hate boner. Moving on.
Okay. Review bombing. Like mass downvoting, review bombing is an organized takeover of online reviews that make a piece of content appear more hated than it really is. Best example of review bombing is Last Jedi Rotten Tomatoes score. It caused a flurry of controversy in the press and was instrumental in pushing the narrative that The Last Jedi was polarizing film among fans and film audiences. So I do want to point out, I don't really trust a lot of those like review sites.
Well, no one should, but that's not the point. He trusts them in every other instance. He doesn't trust this one because it's not jiving with his worldview. And here's the thing, and I mentioned this the last time we touched on the whole polarization thing. If there is a sizable percentage of people who dislike a thing that other people like, it is polarizing by definition. Because polarizing, okay, means that there are multiple poles on a given subject. Meaning that you can have your ivory tower group of critics who like a thing to distraction, and that's fine. But you also, on the other end, in a polarizing situation, have the opposite pole. That's why it's called polarizing, you see, of people who don't like a thing. So even if you think that every single person who ever had a negative opinion about Last Jedi is dead wrong and incorrect and stupid and yada yada and childish and every other negative word you can think of, the fact that they exist and are affected enough in a negative way to express this opinion means it is polarizing by definition. You do not get to literally write off everything that exists outside of your framework. Because unfortunately for you, not liking that the world exists in the way it exists doesn't stop it from existing in that way. You twit. You can say that the negativity is overblown, but you absolutely categorically cannot meaningfully say that the polarization is an illusion. Even if there were a certain number of people within the reviewing demographic that faked accounts or something, the fact that they are willing to go through that process to fake accounts, if that is indeed what they are doing, shows that they are negatively affected in such a way as to be a meaningful contribution to the conversation, whether you like it or not. And now comes the other shoe of this particular canard that you just made for yourself. The way you would demonstrate review bombing, if you could indeed demonstrate it, is very simple. Show that a large percentage of the people leaving negative reviews are bots or created or otherwise not representative of an actual person on the ground. If you could do that, then all of this multi-page gobbledygook about narratives and polls that you favor and polls that you don't favor and all of that would be unnecessary. It would be as simple as demonstrating that a significant portion of the negative reviews that you don't like were created by people with artificial accounts or were created by bots created by people with artificial accounts. That would be a very simple thing to do. It is telling, therefore, that you did not at any point in this article try to do that. You didn't try to simply demonstrate that whatever percentage of people who negatively review Last Jedi are false accounts or bots. You didn't do that. You instead tried to go around the fact that the people leaving negative reviews actually exist and actually are a significantly, like, mathematically significant portion of the fan base by not mathematically invalidating them by showing them that they're by showing that their false accounts are bots, but by morally and sociopolitically invalidating them by slander and strawman and politically arbitrary gobbledygook. That is not how you disprove a backlash, sir. That is how you show yourself to be a pompous pseudo-intellectual aristocrat who thinks that morally invalidating a group of people counts as mathematically invalidating them, which is just stupid. The simple fact of the matter you have to come to terms with, whether you like it or not, is even people you viscerally disagree with and even people you think are stupid are still flesh and blood, actually existent human beings capable of making their own expressions for their own fucking reasons. And as a result of that, you cannot disprove the polarizing nature of Last Jedi. You might be able to make an argument as to why it's not as bad as everyone thinks, or why the people who criticize it for stupid reasons. That's fair enough. But what you absolutely cannot do is claim that there is no controversy. You cannot claim that there is no polarization, because the only way you can do that, given the fact that these people actually exist and actually hold these opinions, is assume, like you have done throughout the majority of this article, that a certain level of moral or sociopolitical invalidity means that someone shouldn't be admitted to the discussion even if they actually exist. And that is a false assumption categorically. Fuck off with it, please. Moving on.
Last paragraph, and then we'll call it.
Yay. How much further do we have to go?
25%, I think. It's hard to really tell.
So close, yet so far. I swear to God, I'm getting booze when we're actually finished with this article.
Aside from alt-right Facebook groups claiming credit for the film's current rotten audience score of 42%, the most obvious indication that The Last Jedi was review bombing was Ron Tomatoes' decision to overhaul the voting system and give the ability to review films only to verified users. These changes were made in the lead-up to Captain Marvel after it became clear that the movie was being politically targeted by a boycott campaign.
Why is it never political targeting in favor of anything? Serious question. If political targeting is a thing that exists, and your claim very much relies on it being a thing that exists, is it not possible that something can be targeted for positive coverage or positive dispensation that is disproportional to the actual organic nature of the world? I ask this because it always seems that whenever something gets negative press or negative coverage, that counts as review bombing. But no amount of ideological circling of the wagons in the ivory tower that is professional, quote-unquote, film criticism ever counts as erroneously trying to buoy up something that isn't that good. If you would at least allow for both of these things to exist, i.e. both overly positive and overly negative review bombing, then that would at least be a somewhat egalitarian way to approach this matter. But here's the thing. I know you well enough at this point, you scary pseudo-intellectual fucktard, to know that you would claim, as you have done many times, that positive coverage of a movie can never be review bombing if it comes from what you consider to be the valid perspective, and no amount of negative criticism can ever count as long as it's coming from a political perspective you don't consider valid and valuable. Which again brings us back to you cannot assume that morally or sociopolitically invalidating a group of people is the same thing as mathematically or existentially invalidating that group of people. If you actually believed in something like review bombing and actually wanted to demonstrate it for all the world to see, all you would need to do is show that a certain percentage of the negative reviews were left by either bots or people using multiple accounts when they previously only had one. This would be a very, very easy thing to verify, and it would prove your point masterfully. But instead of doing that, for you cannot do it because in reality, most people who leave negative reviews are actual people actually representing their own positions, and there just happens to be a lot of them. So instead of doing the mathematical legwork to prove your case, like I just described, you are instead going to attempt to morally and sociopolitically invalidate people instead. But the thing of it is, because morality and sociopolitics exists in the abstract dimension and has no particular uh, direct bearing on the material dimension, morally or sociopolitically invalidating someone does not prevent them from actually existing and actually being a person with their own positions and their own views, no matter how much you want it to be the case. Which means that you, sir, need to come to terms with the fact that the people who left those reviews are actual people with actual opinions that are actually being represented in those negative reviews. And if you dispute me on that, I just told you how to prove me wrong. Figure out how many of the negative reviews left on such things are either bots or people using multiple accounts when previously they only had one. If you can do that, and it actually does mathematically change things to a meaningful degree, I will concede that some percentage of the polarization might be overblown or misrepresentative. But if all you can do is morally and sociopolitically invalidate people that actually exist and actually hold to those positions and therefore actually meaningfully deserve to be counted, then sod off and go fuck yourself. Moving on.
Right, okay. Last sentence. We know from the analysis of 20 anti-The Last Jedi YouTubers that the same people who pushed extensive hate against Last Jedi were leading the hate against Miss Marvel.
Because both Captain Marvel and The Last Jedi are ideologically focused on social justice over character consistency in universe logic, deference to the IP, deference to the fan base, or even continuity within the respective IP that they're talking about. And thus, it pisses off people who actually care about any of the above things, regardless of whether they be left wing, right wing, center wing, or what have you. But you cannot deal with the fact that anyone on the left or in the center would disagree with you or disagree with the ideology of social justice or the ideology which suggests that actively spiting fan bases is a moral virtue somehow. Because those two things are technically separate parts of the ideology, even though they are almost universally inextricably linked. They are worth counting as two separate things, technically. Just like Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy came from two different perspectives. They met in the middle and they found common ground on let's weaponize Star Wars for our own sake and spite all the people who care about it for its own sake. But they technically were coming from two different perspectives. Rian Johnson's was, I dislike Star Wars, so I am actively going to spite Star Wars themes within the Star Wars universe and invert them as much as possible. And Kathleen Kennedy was coming from the I want to weaponize every artistic thing I can get my hands on in the name of social justice perspective. But they were technically two separate perspectives. Anyway, moving on.
Right. Yeah, so this is a video. I don't know if It's from a YouTube channel called the Temple Institute. I watch them sometimes. They're pretty good. Mostly deals like sci-fi stuff. And it's fun channel. It's just, um, yeah, this video is the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a living hell. Um,
And
okay,
yes,
so kind of context.
Dragon Turtle. This is the guy who constantly makes videos about female space marines in 40K as well, which is where I mostly know him from.
Temple Institute.
Yeah, he constantly makes videos about female space marines in 40K.
I don't think that's. I think you're thinking of someone else.
No, I've seen video responses to him. He has made several videos on female space marines in 40K, and it's remarkably stupid. Anyway, he also said some dumb things about the MCU, hence this video response.
To be fair, this was not one I had planned on us reviewing. I had sent it to Dolan for like completely different reasons. But yeah.
But then this week decided to not offer up much in the way of stuff to cover, and now here we are.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. So banana.
Banana.
Imagine for the moment it's January 18th, 18...
Sorry. 20 seconds.
I have nothing to say. Most of that was literally just his opening demographic or his opening graphics,
yeah,
which I'm not going to criticize, even though they did take way too long.
20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway.
1871.
1871.
And you're a French farmer working the countryside.
Wait, no, come back.
Wait, no, come back. I swear I'm going somewhere with this. My point is, for the people of France especially, but also everyone across Europe and beyond, this is the day the world changed forever. Your life and the lives of your countrymen would never be the same again.
Stop it. There is a massive echo that basically is resulting in everything being said twice. I don't know if the video is out of sync or if it's coming out of your mic twice or whatever. But
let me. Okay, hold on. Let me see what I do something with that. Okay. Let me try this again. Let me try playing it again. So tell me if it echoes.
71. And you're a French farmer working the countryside. Wait, no, come back. I swear I'm going somewhere with this. My point is, for the people of France especially, but also everyone across Europe and beyond, this is the day the world changed forever. Your life and the lives of your countrymen would never be the same again. Why? Well, the day before,
it's still there, but it's not as noticeable. I could live with it.
I honestly don't know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, banana.
Your country of France was theoretically at least the most powerful in continental Europe. It had the largest population, excluding Russia, the largest economy, and one of, if not the most powerful armies. But today, January 18th, none of that is true anymore. Because right across your western borders, a new empire has declared itself. And if it's not already obvious, the next few decades will make it abundant.
I highly doubt most people in Regency era France were that affected by any of this, frankly. Like, they might have been affected when it came to, the English going over to France and declaring war and whatnot, but the actual day when England became a thing, especially in, again, roughly Regency time period, people were a lot more isolated into their respective countries. They really, like, they only had the vaguest notion of what any other significant powers in the region were doing, and even then most people had shit to get on with. Like, they didn't have any incentive to care until it resulted in a war or a king being deposed or some other such thing. Like, until the day that England invaded France after this, I would imagine most people didn't care. This is probably going to become a running theme in this video, but one thing I noticed when I was watching this is he seems to act like everyone in history and everyone in the world is a news media junkie, and that everything the news media ever covers is worth actively having an impact on someone's real life, which is not so, and moreover has not been so for all of history. Bang. Banana.
Okay, one sec.
Next few decades will make it abundantly clear. This new nation, the one styling itself Germany, is the new European superpower. It's hard to imagine something like this taking place in our own modern era. A new country coming almost out of nowhere to immediately challenge the supremacy of the United States, or some other big single event that can dramatically change the world.
Again, probably most people in France didn't care about the existence of Germany until some Germans decided they were going to bugger around with France. Because, again, this is probably going to be a running theme, but most people don't care about events, especially not in a pre-printing press or a time when the printing press was not that common, until it actively impacts their life. Like, yeah, you might have seen people reading, like, the earliest newspapers for enjoyment or to stay informed on, like, the most practical matters, but I'm betting most people's reaction in France when Germany became a thing was probably just, meh, I hope they don't invade us. And then they went on about their day. Moving on. Banana.
Wide situation and divide your life into before and an after. Hard to imagine, but not impossible.
It spans the globe like a superhighway. It is called Internet.
Critics say one danger is this could turn out to be an elitist system, one area that will only the people with a computer and a modem.
Depending on where and when you were born into this.
I have to say, like, I only watched this like once. It does feel like he does drag it a bit on before he gets to the point.
No, I know he's not being entirely literal Dragon Turtle, but you'll see what I mean as we actually get into the substance of the video. He seems to be under the apprehension that as soon as news media became a thing in the world, everyone just became inexorably glued to it or something, and that in the modern world, everyone is affected by every little thing that ever crosses a news media screen. But like I said, it'll take a little bit more context of the actual video to make that point. Anyway, Banana. Also,
chances are you're going-
actually, no. Before we continue on, I would have gone with the reference to COVID because that's probably the most recent, like, world changing, life affecting thing that happened in the world. But I can understand why you didn't want to talk about COVID. Although, when was this video produced?
2 weeks ago.
Okay, so you definitely could have brought up COVID, without it being either before COVID or like it did just occur to me that maybe I was criticizing him for not mentioning COVID if this would, and this video might have been before COVID, but even so, like, but even then, I guess you could have gone 9/11, you could have gone any number of elections. There are other more recent examples than the World Wide Web you probably could have used. But anyway, moving on. Banana.
No.
chances are you're going to experience a few events like this, maybe 3 or 4 big ones over the course of your life. These events can be harmful, disruptive, even terrifying, or maybe positive and somehow beneficial to you. But regardless, they shake the foundations you thought your life had. They can reshape your perspective, test your resilience, and alter the course of your life's journey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. This is one of those no duh moments, but then again, I think this is him setting up his pawns for the overall chess game, maybe. So, banana.
Establishing a premise.
Yeah.
Okay.
But above all, they shatter your sense of security and stability. But now I want you to imagine that you're living in the reality known across the multiverse as Earth 616 in the late 2000s. You're sitting down, watching TV, and are astonished to see that billionaire Tony Stark has just
Okay,
revealed
stop.
to the world
Stop,
that he
stop,
is
stop,
Iron Man.
stop.
This is
Sorry, I just want to get the
Right,
point.
but before we get into the actual substance of his argument, I just want to be completely and utterly pedantic here. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is different from the Marvel Comics universe. The Marvel Comics universe is Earth 616. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is Earth 199999.
Yes, I'm not going to disagree with that. Although
And-
I could say, I do want to say, like, in universe-wise or multiverse-wise, every universe would tend to be calling themselves Earth 1.
Yeah, that's always been an issue with multiverse numbering of like everyone I'm sure sees themselves as the default universe, even the really bizarre out there universes, like the one where all the characters are animal people and so on. But even so, regardless of the philosophical issue of every universe is Earth 1 to themselves, we have it categorically confirmed that the Marvel Comics universe is Earth 616, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Earth 19999. And yes, I know they flubbed it in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but that is a continuity error for Multiverse Madness. It does not mean you should double down on that continuity error by constantly confusing and conflating the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the Marvel Comics universe. Anyway,
I also want to point this out. Okay, I lost it. Yeah, no, I lost it.
okay.
I don't think it really matters. To be fair. I think I was just going to point something out from Multiverse of Madness, but it's not tangent. It's not tangent to this.
Okay, so yes, banana.
Yeah.
This is not a life-changing event for you. It's weird and perhaps a little concerning, but you're still able to live your life like you did before. But as the months and years go by, you start seeing more and more strange things in the news. A nuclear physicist and biochemist at Culver University in Virginia turns into a giant green monster and goes on a rampage. That's kind of scary, but probably...
Okay, and here's where the criticisms begin, because It's highly likely that the U.S. government would have suppressed that, if not Shield, because okay, well then this just doubles my point. Yeah, the U.S. government went out of its way to suppress that, so it's not getting covered by the Marvel Cinematic Universe equivalent of CNN or something. So that's not going to be all that revelatory for you.
I mean, I think it would be hard to cover it up with the ending of the Incredible Hulk, mind you.
It's probably going to be hard to cover up something like the Battle of New York, but that's kind of going to be my reoccurring premise. Most of the things he brings up are not that either wouldn't actually make that much of a difference to the day-to-day lives of the average, Marvel Cinematic Universe citizen, or are too small scale to make that much of a difference either way. The only ones that I think would make big splashes are the Avengers level ones or something like Civil War. Those probably would make a difference. But the average movie to movie stuff would either be suppressed by the people in the know so that the public didn't freak out, or would be covered like most other news items and therefore not be that important to the average day-to-day person. Anyway, Banana.
Well, I didn't want to. No, you got everything.
Okay.
Banana.
Not life-changing. Then Tony Stark is back in the news again. His race car got cut in half at the historic Grand Prix in Monaco by some guy with laser whips on his arms. That can't be right. And then that same guy uses an army of flying Iron Man knockoffs to attack the Stark Expo in New York. How could this happen? But all these things are happening in some other part of the world.
Okay, again, I realize it's somewhat fallacious to bring up real world stuff in here, but that's kind of his premise of this video. So I'm going to attempt to make a comparison. How many mass shootings or mass stabbings are there at a given point in the year? Because much to everyone's chagrin, it happens more often than usually even gets that talked about. Like, and again, maybe the uniqueness of the weapon might rate some kind of news cycle for Whiplash, but in a world that is founded upon something like Stark Tech, I can't speak today. It really wouldn't probably be that uncommon, especially when you consider that even prior to Tony's era of technological advancement, his father Howard was basically not William Randolph Hearst. Who am I thinking of? Hugh Hefner and Elon Musk had a baby, or actually no, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and Hugh Hefner had a baby. So in a world that's already been intervened with by Stark Tech, I would imagine that even some of the more out there weapons would be sort of maybe a day's news cycle, but it wouldn't be a lasting news cycle. Anyway, moving on. Banana.
Your life is still pretty much the same, so you try to put it out of your mind. But then you start hearing some even weirder stuff coming out of New Mexico. Some government organization is trying to keep this suppressed, but apparently, not only are the Norse gods real, but one of them destroyed a town while fighting another giant robot, this one powered by magic. Now, at this point, you should...
Okay, once again, you kind of just undid your own argument there by saying the government is trying to keep this suppressed. Like, which means it's probably not going to be on the 11 o'clock news. And even then, if some version of it was on the 11 o'clock news, it would probably be heavily edited because, government trying to cover up thing. And also, they wouldn't have enough details to know that it's powered by magic. They would probably say it's powered by some yet unknown alien technology if they were really going that far, which, again, because S.H.I.E.L.D., I don't even think the Marvel Universe's version of CNN would have access to that information. So, not only are you assuming that this hypothetical person in the Marvel Universe cares excruciatingly about everything that happens in the news, which is not the case in any universe, but also you're assuming that some leaker would spoil things like this and would be in the know enough to do so. If anything, you'd see coverage of this type of stuff on like the in like 4chan or YouTube or somewhere, and we all know how allegedly dubious things that are leaked in those circumstances are, don't we?
Turtle, I think the Star Trek point is more a criticism of the MCU since you don't see any of it in the normal world.
And that's plausible too, but what I'm saying is if Howard Stark is a historical fact for you in the Marvel Universe, that means that at the very least the high-end weaponry side of things are going to be quite more upscale than they are in the real world. And hell, I remember documentaries growing up when the History Channel was actually good and wasn't just the Ancient Aliens and Pawn Stars Network, where they would talk about like the furthest reaches of, sci-fi technology made real or something along those lines. Like there were once upon a time experimental suits of power armor that could increase someone's lift capacity being developed by the military, or there were experimental quote unquote invisibility cloaks type thing where they would figure out fabrics that could like bend light or something, and the documentary was all about how this might one day develop into essentially science fiction technology. And I watched a bunch of those as a kid, and I found them fascinating, but most people wouldn't have give a fuck. I have to believe that facet of humanity would still be extant even in a world that has Howard Stark and then of course his son Tony. So if for example, if a Iron Man style suit of armor came out tomorrow without the cultural impact of, oh hey, it's like an Iron Man suit, it would probably be regarded with the same level of interest as any other piece of experimental military technology, and be like, oh hey, it essentially be one of those scientific interest sort of segments on like the 6 o'clock news. Oh hey, someone in the military developed this new piece of technology, and this new piece of technology may or may not be universalized at some point in later days. And now here's John with the weather sort of thing. Like it would be mentioned as basically a puff piece in the news and wouldn't become relevant more than that. Like actually the fact that Iron Man is Tony Stark is probably more revelatory to the average person than the fact that Iron Man exists. Because
so, sorry, it's just like something that just kind of more of a criticism I have of the MCU's world building overall.
Mhm.
That it doesn't seem like because given Stark Tech and his renewable energy source of repulsor technology and stuff,
yeah, the arc reactor.
right? You just what's always going to bug me is just the general lack of advancement.
Yeah,
for-
you would think, for example, with arc reactor technology, cars would almost be a thing of the past pretty soon because you would we already are making transition to electric cars, and we don't have a basically improved version of cold fusion, which is basically what the arc reactor is. However, I will point out that Tony also tends to keep this technology to himself or in Stark Industries specifically. So it could just be that he doesn't allow this technology out much.
Fair. And also this was something I brought up when we reviewed or talked about Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Just given like the general, how I at least perceive this at least, that if nothing else, there would be somewhat of a shift in priority for humanity. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Given how I'm sure aliens exist and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it would kind of shape our perspective of not not being divided by each other, but more unity. But again, that's the optimism in me.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a situation that results in a actually good one world government for humanity. I
No, I'm
think
not saying a one world government. I'm just saying like we're not constantly trying to pick fights with one another over stupid shit.
the last time something like that happened was the Nazis, and we took our sweet time addressing the Nazi issue, and then went right back to dithering with each other.
No, never mind. I'll shut the fuck up. Yeah.
But
really start to worry. Because if this is true, the implications are enormous. Religious beliefs, scientific understanding, societal norms, none of these can stay the same in a world where gods and magic now exist.
But you barely have time to grapple with that before New York is attacked by aliens that came out of a giant portal in the sky,
only to be stopped by Tony Stark, that huge green fist.
Okay. Here is where my pedantry officially comes online. It's not that gods and magic now exist as a new thing. It's that they always did exist. I can broadly agree that it should have probably had religious or societal impact somehow. But here's the other thing. What with SHIELD trying to suppress this information, and what with it basically only affecting one town, you'd basically wind up with a new version of Roswell type. It'd be a Roswell type scenario until the Battle of New York. I don't think the events of Thor in and of themselves alter all that much, especially when you consider that even in the context of the MCU, magic has existed prior to this in the form of the Tesseract, which the Red Skull specifically tied to the Aesir and the Norse gods, and apparently that is historical. That also is basic bitch historical knowledge at this point because of the existence of the Captain America Museum and stuff. So much like with how the occult actually impacted society in the real world, it would probably be one of those things that would either result in an unsolved mystery sort of scenario where people would have all sorts of theories about it, kind of like cryptozoology and stuff, but it would mostly be only known to those who actually took the time to investigate history. Or it would, again, incentivize things like a new Roswell incident in the case of the town in New Mexico with Thor. It really doesn't exist on the world stage until the Battle of New York. Because until then, it doesn't actually impact the average person's average day-to-day life. You might get a surge in belief in the Norse gods for those of the people on the MCU's equivalent of 4chan that are smart enough to see through Shield's cover-up and try to get the true skinny. But as we see with a lot of modern cover-ups and so on, most of those people probably wouldn't be believed until it did impact the real world, a la something like the Battle of New York. But anyway, moving on.
Right. I got mine, so.
Banana.
Physicist, government assassins, Thor, the god of thunder, and Captain America, who's apparently back from the dead. You might have tried to deny it before, but your old life is over. You now live in a world where all these things exist and can interrupt your life at any time. How can you possibly process all this? The fact that aliens exist alone and they're apparently hostile would...
And again, this is why my supposition is the only thing that really changes the average workaday person's life is the team up scale movies like the Avengers movies or a Civil War type scenario. The average one-offs can be chalked up to government cover-up stupidity or basically a one news cycle interest piece. And again, there are plenty of people who believe and practice magic in the real world, and they're still treated like crackpots. There are plenty of people who specialize in cryptozoology or ufology now, and they're treated like crackpots. So the only thing that changes really is the scale.
I would say maybe those would get, again, like given things that happen, it'd be like a lot more, I want to say, credence given to their things.
After the Battle of New York, probably, but not before.
That's what I meant, not before.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess okay, like again, if we're walking through this kind of logically, would there be assuming people aren't stupid? I know that's a lot to.
Well, it's not even necessarily a stupidity thing. I'm chalking most of this up to.
That's okay. What I was going to say, assuming people aren't stupid, and by people I'm referring to those in like academic kind of places. Would it be possible that those that like study cryptozoology or occultism those become like major themes within certain academic circles? Like
Probably
things like Battle of New York, things like that.
Probably better funded. I don't think they would necessarily become any more major.
Okay.
If, like, even in Thor: The Dark World, which I never thought I would see myself defending Thor: The Dark World, even though the guy played by Peter Skarsgård, whose name I can't remember.
Selvig.
Thank you. Even so, Selvig was still kind of regarded as somewhat of a crackpot when he went on about what was it? The I want to say incursion, but that's not right. The
9 Realms Convergence.
convergence. There we go. But yeah, when he was going on about the convergence, people were still kind of looking sideways at him because this is the other thing. People's normality threshold is really weird in the sense that even if you show someone some supernatural events, they will still have skepticism with regards to larger supernatural events. As in, okay, the Battle of New York, we all know it happened, but the idea of an interdimensional convergence with the 9 realms is still silly or still out there, and so on and so on and so forth. Just like with the aforementioned thing of everyone knows it to be historical fact that the Red Skull, whose name I can't remember, he used a power source that was associated with the Norse gods, i.e. the Tesseracts, to create hyper-advanced weapons in World War II, and was thwarted by Captain America. That's like known history to the MCU. That being the case, that would even make something like the events of Thor and the attack on the New Mexico town maybe even easier to accept, because it's like, oh, this is similar to that obscure piece of possibly alien technology that the Red Skull had in World War II, which we all grew up knowing about in our schoolrooms and stuff. Because I'm assuming that the MCU, much like real world society, focuses way too freaking much on World War II. And it would probably be even more so if there was an actual Captain America involved. But, moving on.
Probably, okay. Can't believe I'm saying this. It's sort of on their side here. Think Chicago before and after Battlegrounds. Also, are you saying even you wouldn't be shocked if several gods started walking the earth long enough to get in a huge fight and level a town and occasionally pop back in every now and again?
I'm saying that with the Shield cover-ups, the most they're probably going to allow to leak to the media is there was an alien invasion. They're probably not going to mention anything about the Aesir or the Asgardians. They're probably not going to mention anything about the power source of the robot that Loki sent after Thor. And they're also probably not even necessarily going to know, because remember, for most of the early part of the MCU, they were using the Clark definition of magic, not any actual like meaningful supernatural definition of magic. So even then, if they called it magic, they would call it magic in the sort of semi-dismissive Clark tech sort of term. And even those in the know, like Selvig and James Foster, would probably only further muddy the waters with that, because they would want to view it from a physicist perspective rather than a oh shit, the Norse gods exist perspective. And again, this is why this is why I say the ones that the MCU would actually be changed by are the Avengers level stuff. The events of something like Changes or the events of something like Battlegrounds are Avengers level changes to the status quo. But that doesn't mean that they can't. That doesn't mean that the powers that be can't cover up something like something like Deadbeat or Turncoat and so on. If you take my using Dresden Files as the measuring stick, I can tell.
You know?
Yeah, moving on.
be the single most important event in the history of... Oh, we got to worry about that later. The president was almost assassinated, and apparently the vice president was in on it. The implications of this are enormous. The level of corruption necessary for such a thing. Oh, wait, we got to deal with that later because some dark elves just attacked London. Is that right? Where did those dark elves... Okay, no time to think about that. A fleet of flying aircraft carriers almost assassinated.
Okay, I'm confused at the question of scale here and the question of how much do you expect the average normie to be that interested in the news media on a day-to-day basis. But like assassinations and political corruption are nowhere near on the scale of Earth was invaded by aliens just 5 seconds ago. Those are not equivalent things, and they wouldn't have equivalent impact on the average working stiff. Like, assassinations and shit like that happen all the freaking time, and people virtue signal about it on Twitter for 5 minutes and then continue on with their day. Like, again, even if I'm trying to be as charitable as possible to this guy's point, his definition of scale is really freaking weird, because he just equated assassination possibly due to political corruption with attack by dark elves. Those are not even remotely equivalent things to a average working stiff.
To be fully honest, he's also like, the thing is, like, they're also not like, there would be a lot of context that a lot of people would not know from like the outsider's perspective. Because, like, would you know that they're dark elves, considering the fact that, you know, it's like,
or would it be just another alien invasion?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I get his point. It's just, again, he's trying to speak from both, like, someone who would live in this universe's perspective, but also someone who watches the movie's perspective. So it's kind of throwing me for a loop here.
He's trying to make an in-universe point, but he's bringing in stuff that would either be obscured in universe or would actively be suppressed in universe. And also, once again, at the heart of this, I think there's an assumption that people are more politically alert to things like the news media than they actually are, which I don't want to use the word projection, because I think projection is a basic bitch accusation that gets way overused. But it does seem to imply to me, especially because I've seen some of this guy's other more quote-unquote political positions here, that maybe he's projecting his level of addiction to the news media onto the average person, not just within the real world, but also apparently within the MCU. And again, the average working stiff simply doesn't give a fuck unless it's something that actually impacts their life, which is my sort of compromise with him would be people's worlds would be shattered by the Avengers movies or by something like Civil War, but not by something like Winter Soldier or Iron Man 1 or 2 or the Hulk or Thor. Those kind of stuff would probably be relegated to the same sort of conspiratorial chat room talking on the internet that you get actual But basically, what I'm thinking is stuff like the events of Thor and stuff like the events of the first Hulk movie would be relegated to the same relative treatment as something like WikiLeaks. I could see them getting WikiLeaked if there was such a thing as WikiLeaks in the Marvel Universe. But more than that, or more than being talked about on 4chan, I doubt it. The Battle of New York, that would get talked about. Ultron trying to drop Sokovia on Earth and wipe out humanity, that would get talked about. The events of Infinity War and Endgame, those would definitely get talked about. the events of Civil War would definitely get talked about. But anything short of those type things wouldn't be that world changing. And those are spaced out enough that people probably could become accustomed to them.
Chantal, to be fair, it is still probably close enough. Like, you know how there are gods and aliens and both are at least partially hostile, and meanwhile your government is voting rather than handle the situation.
I brainstorm kind of got garbled there, so I'll have to read it actually in the chat. Yeah, but again, that's to some extent Dragon Turtle. That's the kind of things that the news media always covered. News just in: the government is corrupt and backstabbing in a new and inefficient way. Whoop-de frickin' do. Also, and again, I realize that this might be projecting a little bit too much real-world logic onto this, but given the fact that the news media prioritize things weirdly in our universe, I can't imagine what sort of half-baked, quasi-prioritized version of these events the average person would get from the news media. I mean, think of TDS in 2016 through 2020, and think of how the world was actually impacted by the Trump presidency, for example. If anything, the people in the MCU would not trust the news media or the government at all. Like the already extant lack of trust in the government or the media would be turned up to an 11 by the time of Civil War, let alone something like an Avengers movie or especially The Blip, which Brainstormer and I have both gone into great detail on how there should have basically been an apocalypse between Infinity War and Endgame, but that's
Also,
not.
it's one of the most untapped potentials of things of the MCU. Basically, a credible assassination attempt, let alone successful, not just throwing a shoe at Bush, would be a historic thing. In the middle of crisis when people are already scared, that could spark an explosion of panic.
Again, that's why my thinking would be it would basically exacerbate what's currently happening. It would make those things happen a lot sooner and a lot larger. Like there would be a combination George Floyd or January 6th style thing probably after every single Avengers movie, let alone or the events of every single Avengers movie, let alone when the blip happens. That would be a civilization literally ends sort of thing. But yeah, as far as I can tell, the only things they've undersold is there should be a hell of a lot more people converting to Norse paganism in the MCU post Battle of New York, and there would be a hell of a lot more people availing themselves of Stark tech or magic, and there would be a hell of a lot more riots in the MCU than there otherwise were. And
Yeah.
also the blip should have been apocalyptic, or at least very, very close to being apocalyptic.
Anyway,
that's the one they most massively undersold, was they don't actually think through the implications of the snap at all. Anyway, banana.
Hold on, another robot just tried to turn an entire city into a meteor.
A tsunami has hit Vietnam. Massive flooding alert. Crisis alert. Oasis outbreak. Crisis alert.
There's a type of trauma called crisis fatigue that refers to the sense of helplessness, exhaustion, apathy, and emotional strain that develops as the result of prolonged
And again, the main issue I have with this line of thinking is only half of the events that he's gone into would even rate this kind of reaction. Unless you were a complete and utter news junkie, and even then, half of it is being actively suppressed by organizations like S.H.I.E.L.D. So,
I do also want to mention it, but a lot of those disasters are stopped as well.
Yeah.
Prevented, so.
By, the super beings that are a dime a dozen now, basically.
Yeah. But, I mean, I get it. Like, I guess Invincible, which I think honestly handles a lot of things rather well for, like, when you really think about the implications of having superheroes in the world.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of times, a lot of people aren't too bothered because there's always superhero stuff and stuff.
Yeah, it's like, well, there's a frightening thing happening, but Omni-Man or the Guardians of the Globe or Invincible or whoever we can get is doing something about it. So, carry on.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on.
Yep, banana.
Exposure to a continuous series of challenging circumstances. People can begin to feel detached from their own lives, and the symptoms can be extremely harmful. By this point, though,
It feels like everyone in Earth 616 would have developed some variation of this.
So when half the universe's population is disintegrated by an interstellar god like Despot, does it really even matter?
Okay, one, again, being very pedantic, I realize, but Earth 99999. Two, again, half of the things that you brought up would either not really make that much of a difference, or would be covered up, or simply would be a prelude to one of the ones people would actually give a fuck about. Also, you are way underselling the scale of the snap/blip, because so far the biggest thing that's happened to the average Joe Blow in the MCU is the Battle of New York, which basically was, and I will give you this, the Battle of New York was basically if 10 separate 9/11 style events happened all at once. Also aliens. So that's fair enough. But as far as the average person is concerned, that is the largest scale of stuff that's happened in the MCU that would be that much of a big deal. So the snap/blip is far larger than that. And I will give you also that the MCU themselves pays very little attention to this, because it basically should have been Mad Max up in there by the time the other half of people came back. Which is why Brainstormer and I made a point to basically, when we do our version of this for the Leonard universe, to actually play the ball where it freaking lies. But, whatever.
Oh, okay. So, would you have, I'm assuming it's been fine after, because don't worry, after 9/11, because don't worry, government agencies are handling it. Let alone some Wild West town where people were being robbed in real life on the roads, and some small posse of sheriffs and bounty hunters, if not random vigilantes, are on it.
Again, you're assuming people on the ground would know that much and would actually give enough of a shit to. Because this is the thing. Most people and I'm assuming this is true for the MCU as well, because there's no reason to think otherwise, most people are not news media junkies. And even the people that are, especially post, 2008 through 2012 through through 2018, which the MCU does flow fairly concordantly, get most of their news from not the legacy alphabet networks, but from the internet. And just like now, when we see things being leaked on the internet first by things like WikiLeaks and 4chan, and then only then later being taken up by the mainstream media, you'd probably get something similar in the MCU, which is why again, I'm willing to concede that the Avengers type stuff would be a big deal, but the one-off movies probably wouldn't be.
But a lot of people are drama junkies, let's face it.
Yes, and again, the question is, how much do they actually get told, and how much do the people who do know what's going on get believed? And how much would the government's misinformation obsession be exacerbated by things like the stuff that happens in the MCU? Because we're already in a misinformation obsessed dystopia over things like COVID, let alone something like the Battle of New York or the snap. So, yeah, I have questions about how the governments in the MCU operate more than I do what the average, construction worker or plumber would think, because we've actually seen to some degree how the average construction worker or plumber operates in the MCU in the case of damage control, or even something like the ones that appeared in She-Hulk that have nothing to do with their comic counterparts, the ones that are empowered by the Asgardian, like Crowbar.
Wrecking Crew.
Thank you. We've seen how the average Joe Blow or Jane Blow deals with that stuff, and they go, oh hey, hyper advanced alien technology on the ground, I'm gonna make a business out of that. Or hey, we have powers now thanks to a random Asgardian crowbar. I guess we're going to be basically a gang now. Like we've seen how the average Joe Blow or Jane Blow in the MCU react to those things, and they're not really all that traumatized. The people directly involved in the events probably would be. Like, I imagine there would probably be a mass exodus of people from New York after a while. And this is the other thing. How much of people's obsession with the drama aspect of it would basically boil down to glorified virtue signaling? Like, and I know I'm gonna not make any friends with this point, but a lot of people for a good solid 10 years after 9/11 happened acted like they were personally aggrieved, even if they were nowhere near New York, nowhere near the Twin Towers, nowhere near 9/11, for 10 years, even to the point where it actually started pissing off people that were directly involved in the events of 9/11. And I don't blame them, because hearing someone else virtue signal about something that actually happened to you would get annoying after like 5 seconds, let alone 10 years. So, yeah, again, my thinking is the only events that would really make it that huge of a difference to the average person would be the Avengers level threats and Civil War, bearing in mind that we on Earth probably wouldn't know that much about stuff that happened off planet, so we wouldn't know anything about the events of Ragnarok. We wouldn't know anything about the Guardians until they showed up during Avengers Infinity War and so on. And even then, the big battle in Infinity War happened in Wakanda the one that was on Earth, I mean. So we wouldn't know about the other half of the stuff until Stark comes home in Endgame and explains things to people. I would imagine the price of Stark Industries stock would go up like a motherfucker once he became not only a superhero but also a massively public figure. Like, think Elon Musk on steroids levels of pop culture applicability. Anyway, moving on. Banana.
Anymore, even if you haven't been directly affected until now by all these new things, your worldview must have been shattered so many times. What's one more? Wouldn't it just be easier to give up and accept this new reality? Accept that your own decisions, actions, and thoughts have become inconsequential? The world is too unpredictable and unstable now. Even if it would only...
Okay, yeah.
How? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I remember you saying that it was a bit nihilistic, and hearing that again now. Oh, God.
Yeah, like how exactly even if everyone on Earth was a news junkie like you seem to think they would be, and even if every single event that you alluded to led to a 9/11 style freakouts, how does that relate to therefore the blip is no longer important, or therefore the snap is no longer important? And even more so, how would that translate into the, well, I'm not important, so I might as well just give up? You do realize there are things that people can do in the MCU, right? Like, you don't. Sure, some superheroes just get their powers randomly, but a lot of superpowers, quote unquote, are skill based. Like talk about the ideal environment for STEM enrollment. If people growing up in the MCU know that one of the only things keeping them from, an apocalypse every week was someone who was armed with hyper advanced technology, STEM enrollments would go up like that, like double, triple, quadruple fold over the course of 10 years. I would bet money on it. And then you get people, and then I imagine also the enrollment at Kamar-Taj would go through the roof as the average Joe Blow person tries to at least get some understanding of magic. Even the hippie trippy new agey stuff would probably become a multi-billion-dollar industry and so on. But I don't accept the notion that people are just going to sit there and take it, even if they are negatively impacted by all this shit. They're going to figure out, okay, what sorts of people are capable of standing up against this shit? And for the average Joe Blow person, the answer is people who know hyper advanced science and technology, therefore STEM enrollments go up like crazy, and people who know magic. So therefore the successors to the Ancient One are going to have a hell of a lot more people to teach. And even then, prior to magic becoming extremely common knowledge because of Doctor Strange, the enrollments for Kamar-Taj in Doctor Strange 1 and 2 were both a lot larger than the average person probably would think. Like, there was an entire class that Stephen Strange was a part of. And yes, he was the top of his class as far as sorcery goes. But that doesn't mean that there aren't at least, 200 people in a given class group studying with him. And even if they don't become as competent at magic as he does, because he genuinely is a genius and genuinely does have a natural affinity for it seems, there are still going to be more people in the average, in the average group of people who know at least the basics of magic. And same is true with STEM enrollments and Tony Stark. Sure, not everyone is going to rise to the level of Tony Stark or Riri Williams, as much as we all hate acknowledging that. But people are going to learn enough to defend themselves, or to at least know what's going the fuck on. I don't accept the notion that people are just going to roll over and, well, there's nothing I can do and I don't have superpowers, so meh. No, there are ways to get superpowers that are skill-based, even if you don't. Anyway, moving on. Yeah. Banana.
Hold on. Janitorial sample likely complex studies for multiple generations and caused chaos for at least a decade. Depends how you define personally. I take it as an attack on my life as an American since the only reason was convenient to make happily spend my nation into chaos/destruction. Don, are you saying it's just a matter of effort to become the next Iron Man or Doctor Strange? Even then, have you met humanity?
I'm not entirely saying that. I'm saying that natural skill and natural talent do create somewhat of a bottleneck, just like always. But in general, basic tech competency or basic magic competency would probably become prioritized in such a world, and people would not likely just roll over and take it. Sure, you'd still get the normiest of the normies of the normies that would carry on with life as normal, not even trying to learn anything about advanced technology or advanced magic. But for every 5 or 10 of those, you'd get the one kid who, because here's the thing. Even now, even in the average high school, there are people who obsess over things like robotics, and there's the average, goth or new age type witch person in any given graduating class of high schoolers. So, one, those people would especially get fast tracked into the higher echelons of stuff just because they're naturally inclined to it. And two, there would probably be a lot more of those, of both categories of people in the MCU.
Okay, I'm gonna read this last thing, Giant Troll, and then we're gonna move on. Okay. At the risk of reading too much into things, I think he means give up, as in, well, no use making sense of a world when our entire understanding of everything is going to be undermined by next year's big thing.
But that's the fundamental disagreement I have with this guy. There's not enough here that's going to fundamentally alter someone's entire worldview at any given moment. The Avengers level stuff, yeah, it's going to be a big freaking deal. It's going to be like, 1 or 2 9/11s happening all simultaneously. But even then, even in the post 9/11 era where everyone was paranoid about terrorists every 5 freaking minutes, it didn't really change the way humanity operates that much. It might have driven some people to try and educate themselves on Islam more, or it might have driven some people to be a little bit more paranoid about safety more, and that would be, where the people studying more STEM or trying to get into Kamar-Taj more would happen. But it doesn't, just because big scary thing happened doesn't mean it changes the way you view the world. Just like, the average physicist making headway on understanding quantum physics. You say quantum physics to the average person and they just go, that's cool and everything, but it doesn't put food on the table, so yeah. And you'd still get some of that even in an MCU style situation.
Okay, again. Okay,
Well,
again.
Let's get through at least the sizable portion of this before we go back to the conversation. Banana.
Only ever been an illusion, at least before
There was the sense that the world had a solid foundation, something to give you security and purpose. But that's gone, and it gets harder and harder to remember what life was like before with every passing moment. And this series of life-shattering events is not slowing down. Instead, it's accelerating. A new African superpower with an unstable.
Okay, again, I hate to burst your pseudo-intellectual bubble, sir, but most people don't spend agonizing periods of life worrying about their purpose in life. There's too much shit to actually get on with. And two, while these events would create new problems, they would also present new solutions, i.e., you'd see fewer and fewer communications degrees and more STEM degrees as people try to get at least some understanding of Stark Tech. Or you'd get people trying their damnedest to learn anything they could about magic when previously they wouldn't have. And you'd especially get people who were already interested in those things pushed harder to make it in life. As in, the average kid in high school who's interested in robotics would probably be more likely to get a scholarship to study it in college. Or you'd get the average person who under normal circumstances would have watched The Craft too much and decided to become a goth witch, deciding I'm going to seek out, I don't know, Agatha Harkness and get her to teach me, or I'm going to find enough money for a plane ticket and wind up in Nepal so I can study at Kamartaj, and so on and so on and so forth.
So, reading Granholm's comment. Again, though, have you met the average person? I think 3% or less will seriously do it. Maybe 10% if anyone was convicted, but convinced, I think is what I meant to say, that they have that capability and have some of their life restrictions dealt with, like, where am I going to get money or who will take care of my kids?
See, this is where I think you and I are disagreeing. I don't think you need more money necessarily. I think you'd see a reallocation of resources. So, like, the person who previously would have studied something like communications or programming in college is now going to study Stark Tech. The person who previously would have spent their gap year backpacking around French Riviera is probably going to wind up in India somewhere. The person who takes out a student loan to study an art degree might be persuaded to go off into super suit design. You'd get a bunch of Edna Modes or something, and so on and so on and so forth. I think what you'd get is a reorganizing of resources rather than a need of where am I going to get the money for this, that, or the other. It'd be, I'm going to take the money that I was going to use on a student loan anyway, and I'm going to funnel it towards a degree that I know is useful, i.e., high-level engineering or fashion design, or there is a part of me that hopes that there is a incentive to institutionalize teaching magic in colleges now, but I think I might be projecting my desires onto things again a little bit too much. That would make sense, but at that point I would agree with you that would be a little bit too much for humanity. But you'd certainly get people tracking down Agatha Harkness or finding their way to Kamartaj or something. Moving on. Banana.
Okay, I'm going to read this last comment, then I'll over and move on. This point may be refuted depending on how much is successfully covered up by the government. Following that, you have super tech, made in a cave, mutants that can demolish cities, ancient gods, magic, hidden civilizations, alien invasions, alien international communities, afterlife, etc. Hell, the planet is an alien god. Because everything we know about geology and volcanology, and how the whole universe calls physics into question.
Again, you'd have people like Jane Foster and Selvig bridging the gap of physics understanding there, so that's not as much of an issue. stuff like Tiamat existing probably wouldn't be known to the average person. You would probably see, and I wish the MCU would reference this more, a upshoot in paganism, especially Norse paganism. And you would see people leaving Christianity in droves. But then again, Steve Rogers knows Thor personally, and he's not convinced to convert from Christianity. So you'd probably see a certain percentage of people who would be going hard into the apologetics paint at that point.
Right. I also want to point something out that I think we have largely forgotten. Given this is kind of a major thing that it was kind of the basis of Marvel overall, which is Marvel reflects our real world.
The world outside your window, yeah.
Yeah. And logically, given all the events that do happen, there would be a lot more change in the world, but they don't really do that. So I think that has kind of been a fundamental flaw with the philosophy, I guess, overall world philosophy in terms of the writing of Marvel, if we're really thinking about it. But I just felt like that needed to be pointed out just because it's don't get me wrong, I get where the Naturals come from, and I think you and I do agree that there would actually be a lot of like significant changes. I wouldn't say major, but significant changes.
Yeah, like I just gave a couple examples. Like Christianity should be on its last legs in the MCU because there should be a lot more polytheists, especially Norse ones. But that's neither here nor there. As to your joke point, Dragon Turtle, about the person backpacking in their gap year is either looking for pseudo philosophy or a vacation. What I'm saying is there might be enough major events in the MCU to incentivize that person to be a little bit more woken up. And basically, okay, what I'm getting at is in our world, philosophy and mysticism are regarded as nebulous and abstract enough things that you can get the hippies going basically woo-woo about things. But in a world like the MCU, where you know for a fact there is a master sorcerer in New York on Bleecker Street, being Doctor Strange, and he has had major impacts on practical matters, you probably would see a shift from the more woo-woo kinds of new agey magic stuff to practical applied occult sorcery. Which frankly to me sounds like a goddamn paradise, but yeah, I digress. Because I get so sick of what I call the soft magics. Just like there are hard sciences and soft sciences, there are soft magics and there are hard magics, and I really would like to see a heavier emphasis on the hard magics in the world. And the MCU's events probably would incentivize such a thing. I.e., why would you spend your gap year on abstract woo-woo when you know magic is a force to be reckoned with and it can actually result in practical, physical, demonstrable effects? Granted, maybe I'm being a little bit naive in there, but yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying you wouldn't get a bunch of them dropping out or giving up halfway through. I mean, hell, even in She-Hulk, as bad as that show was, there was an example of a ex-student at Camartage who basically gave up and used the one gimmick that he learned with the sling ring to become a stage illusionist, which ruffled every part of my jimmies, but that's neither here nor there. but you would get people who would only master one gimmick or would try to make a career from one gimmick, like that one dude with the sling ring. But you'd still have magic being seen as more commonplace.
Okay. Also, yeah. Hello, Ahsoka. Sorry, we were just busy discussing things. So, do you think we are going to stop answering comments right for the moment, just so we can get this? I want to get to
Yeah,
this.
so we can at least finish this one.
Yeah. Okay. Banana?
Political system, Chinese mythological creatures, multiverse full of different versions of yourself,
Giant space things. We've gotten to the point where who cares if there's a giant statue in the middle of the ocean? And I know we all like to think that if we ended up in Earth 616, we'd be the guy with the awesome suit of armor, or the supernatural powers, or the godlike abilities. But
Stop. Okay. Before I address.
Sorry, I just have something to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, Marvel has this weird thing where, like, they're not really showing the human perspective of anything nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Of all this, and it's a weird thing. But also, I do disagree with what he was saying right now before we stopped it. Like but I feel like you could put it in better words than I could.
Yeah, I'll try to put a finer point into things. Okay, addressing the first half of that first, because the second half is a whole other thing into itself. Most of the wider cosmic stuff, the stuff that doesn't directly impact Earth, people both wouldn't know and wouldn't care. The only people that would know about, like, the multiverse thing, for example, are the one class of students at Kamar-Taj that Wanda freaking nukes from orbit with magic, or any other, like, sorcery students that manage to rise through the ranks and become, like, assistants to Doctor Strange or something. So there's that. But most of the off-Earth cosmic stuff, the stuff that doesn't directly apply to Earth, people both wouldn't be incentivized to know about and wouldn't be incentivized to care about, even if they did know, for the most part. If anything, this kind of stuff would get referenced in superhero memoirs, like the one Scott Lang has in Ant-Man 3, which that would be. Those would sell like freaking hotcakes, just because you would have people being kind of semi-half informed and would be dying, would be chomping at the bit to get some firsthand explanations. But yeah, most of the cosmic and mystical stuff, unless they were a person studying the cosmic and mystical side of things, like yours truly, they wouldn't care. Secondly, as I alluded to before, it's not like all superpowers are entirely at random here. Yeah, you wouldn't get many Spider-Men, or you wouldn't get many mutants or Inhumans. Then again, mutants and Inhumans really aren't a thing in the wider scale of the MCU as yet, because of the continuity gaps between the shows and the movies. But and also the fact that the X-Men haven't been introduced yet, and nothing associated with the mutants has been yet. But there are definitely sources of superpowers that are skill-based. You get people, like I say, you get people studying STEM a lot more to keep up with Stark tech, and you get people probably a lot more willing to trek to Nepal to study with Wong and Kamar-Taj, or tracking down Agatha Harkness or someone similar to her. I.e., Magic is a skill, science is a skill, skills can be developed, and people would definitely be more incentivized to at least try to develop those skills. So it's not a cosmic roll of the dice. It's not a cosmic roll of the dice who does and doesn't get superpowers. At least not within the purview of science and magic. The like augmented what are they called? Enhanced type people, they would be rare. The people who would randomly get their powers like a Spider-Man or somebody like that, they would be rare. But the people who apply themselves at least enough to have some level of competency with either high science or magic, they would be a lot more common than you'd think, because it is actually in people's control whether they choose to try and develop those skills. Moving on. Unless you had anything to add to that.
No. No, I'm good. I'm good.
Banana.
3 more minutes. Yeah, banana.
Chances are you'd be doing essentially what you're doing now, except you get to live in a world where no truths are self-evident and all men are no longer created equal.
Governments and institutions are powerless, and your only hope is that this new upper class of beings beyond oversight without limits will take care of you.
And where once, maybe, you might have been able to...
Okay, one, like I previously mentioned, it's in your power. It is in your power, at least in some cases, whether you develop super skills or not. 2, men already aren't exactly created equal. There are still professional athletes. There are still people over like 7 feet tall. There are still geniuses and savants who can do math faster than a calculator. Or in Stephen Hawking's case, he could literally do high level physics in his head. So that's not exactly new to the MCU. That's not something that differentiates the real world from the MCU. The scale might, but even so, with regards to it's not in your power whether these super beings are nice to you or not. Again, at least with regards to science and magic, it is in your power whether you are at least on the same footing as they are, to at least be judged by the same standards. And 2, they're still human beings. Like no one has gone full Homelander or full Omni-Man yet. Not even the villains have as yet gone full Omni-Man or full Homelander yet. And once again, I want to point this out. Big important society altering things actually happen in the real world, and it doesn't necessarily change the way people view things existentially. So this idea of yours that superheroes are almost a Lovecraftian thing, which I think is what he's implying, that the existence of superheroes is an almost Lovecraftian thing unto itself, is just silly. There are already hyper advanced pieces of technology that governments and militaries have access to. There are already people who are who reach the extremes of human potential, either through genetic fluke or through hyper development or through some combination of the two. There are already people like professional athletes who are on the top scale of what's plausible for a human being, and it doesn't really change jack shit. And I don't think, by and large, most of the stuff in the MCU would change all that much. Magic is more overt, more categorically real, and more common in the MCU, so you get more people studying that. Technology is high enough and actually impacts the world enough that you get a lot more people studying STEM. I could accept that. You would get the occasional enhanced individual like a Peter Parker or a Wanda Maximoff or a Pietro Maximoff, but those would be fairly rare, and at least as far as we can see in the MCU, they don't even emerge into the public sphere that often. So you'd see Norse paganism or polytheism in general going up because Thor exists definitively, but you'd also get people like Selvig and Jane Foster looking at it from an alien perspective or from a hyper advanced physics perspective. So yeah, no, it wouldn't be some kind of existential crisis. It would just be, hey, this news cycle contains a bunch of weird shit. Like every other freaking news cycle. Whoop-de-doo.
Okay. Goodbye, Grantos, and go. So, yeah, CMS. Also, the one that you made a comment previously, again, you're basically, well, why don't you just work hard and didn't make Einstein like death, was very much psycho. And even then, you'd be the best and just die anyway.
Dragon Turtle, that wasn't my point. I'm well aware that not everyone is in the same category as a professional athlete. My thinking is the enhanced individuals would be relatively in the same category as a professional athlete. I.e., his claim was that the MCU is somehow different because, quote unquote, not all men are created equal, and there's a class of people who are categorically superior to you, yada yada yada. Well, that's somewhat true in the real world already. The only thing that would change is the scale. My claim was that there are aptitudes whereby an average person can develop the skills to make themselves super, like a Tony Stark or a Doctor Strange, because magic and science are both skills in the context of the MCU. That doesn't mean that they would all rise to the level of a Doctor Strange, because even in Doctor Strange 1, we see that there were hundreds of people in Kamar-Taj in the same class as Doctor Strange, learning the same skills. And hell, most of them were excelling at the sling ring better than he was for a while there. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to become a Doctor Strange style character, but basic science competency to the point that you can understand Stark tech, and basic magic competency to the point that you could at least make a sling ring work, probably would become more common in the MCU, simply because there are some aspects of this that anyone can do. Granted, only the highest percentage of people are going to excel enough to be a Doctor Strange or a Tony Stark, but there's a lot narrower gap between the average Joe Blow who learns just barely how to operate the sling ring, and Tony Stark than there is between someone who just, for whatever reason, doesn't decide to learn anything from this.
Social gaming, I mean, with how common babies are and how come mass destruction is, it ain't that far to say living in a highly populated city or region would be hell. Living in the suburbs would probably be as nice as it is today.
Hang on, I'm trying to find that because I think it's your Fran that drowns you out sometimes, Brainstormer.
And it's literally on the other side of the room.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, Ahsoka. you would have the highly intelligent people specializing in one of the two variants, and also even the mediocrely intelligent people or the middlingly intelligent people would be able to develop some competency, like in the same way as with regards to science, we all have at least some understanding of science because they literally teach it in schools now, and have for the last 100 years or so. So we would at least have some basis for it. And then, like I said earlier, there's always that one kid. There's always that one really, really scientifically minded kid who excels at robotics or something. And in the MCU, that person would probably go immediately to Stark Tech. And like I also mentioned earlier, there's always that one, usually goth girl or goth guy in any given high school who studies magic. And in the MCU's context, that person would probably find their way over to Kamar-Taj. They probably wouldn't all become a Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange's aptitude for magic is rare, but basic magic competency is not implausible. And in She-Hulk, there was even a guy who I think was there for like a week, long enough to master the sling ring, and decided, screw this, I'm going to be a stage magician and use the sling ring as my one actual gimmick of real magic. Which, I hate that guy's guts on general principle as a magical practitioner, but they would exist. Anyway, moving on. Banana.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to say, so.
Convince yourself that at least these people had in some way earned their powers, that they had either the intellect, judgment, or merit to be worthy of them. That is no longer the case, if it ever was at all. Now you have a teenager with the cosmic powers of the Noor dimension, and another one that can grow to gigantic size, and another one really good at shooting arrows. Actually, that last one isn't.
Okay, again, that is the case for the vast majority of superheroes. They are worthy of their powers either through some kind of merit or some kind of moral purity. Like, that's the whole premise of Captain America. And I mean, Thor literally can't use his hammer unless he be worthy. So yeah, no, that doesn't change at all. If anything, superheroes existing hyper emphasizes meritocracy and probably incentivizes people to be more driven and more meritocratic. Of like, if I'm really, really good morally, or really, really good skill wise, or really, really good intellectually, I might become a superhero someday. Or at least someone that a superhero might grow to respect. That is a hell of an incentive, don't you think? It certainly wouldn't undermine meritocracy, because like I just got through saying, you are fundamentally misunderstanding how superheroes work, because 99% of them did have to go through some life-affirming or life-defining worthiness hierarchy in order to get their powers. So yeah.
Like how gaming, hell with people having stuff with magic being confronted with, you would have a few people who would probably make deals with Mephisto. I mean, that is a task for the vast majority, or just hard training hard. Let's be honest here, Hawkeye basically trained a good majority of his life to use the bow and arrow, or to put your time and effort into to probably become at least a street level hero.
Yeah, and again, for every one person who excels at enough at one skill to become a superhero at it, there are hundreds of thousands of other people who might not rise to the level of being a superhero, but are at least magically competent, or at least good enough with one piece of Stark tech to create a superhero gimmick. Or again, hell, the example of the Wrecking Crew. They found one Asgardian crowbar, and it gave them all powers. If you know anything about the Wrecking Crew. So yeah, there would probably be a lot more mid-tier heroes and a lot of people who use their powers for something other than superheroics, like the one dude who mastered how to use the sling ring and then decided, screw it, I'm going to become a stage illusionist, but my vendetta against that guy will never end. But yeah, you'd get a lot of people who would learn just enough or master just enough to have one good gimmick, and then they would use it for whatever they wanted to.
I mean, a person with a gun is considered street level. Realistically, the vast majority of heroes would be street level.
Well, or they wouldn't even be heroes at all because they would find some other use for their powers, which is the other thing. Not even everyone who develops a skill or a power is going to use it to become a superhero. Hell, She-Hulk decides to stick with being a lawyer for the most part. Granted, the way that they handled that was remarkably stupid in the MCU, but you know what I'm saying. And the one dude decides he's going to use his sling ring gimmick to become a stage illusionist or something. So a lot of people wouldn't even necessarily be on the hero index. They would just be someone with a meta ability of some description, or a power, or a skill.
I mean, not everyone, but still, they would be street level.
Yeah, there would be a lot more B and C list quote unquote heroes, and a lot more B and C list users of either technology or magic to just do whatever.
And I don't mean to cut this off, but
yeah.
You got it.
Moving on. Banana.
Oh no.
So bad, but you get my point. Now we have essentially children being given these same godlike powers, and you can only cross your fingers that they have the emotional maturity to handle them. You have to hope that they had someone in their formative years who taught them that with great power comes the immense burden of accountability
and the obligation to wield that power judiciously as it carries the potential to shape it.
Okay, you are way over elaborating the with great power comes great responsibility thing. But also, there are already kids with high level ability. Again, using the example of professional athletes, there are people who are like 16 who are, you know, Shaquille O'Neal sized. And there are people who are like 16, and there are also people who are like 16 who have photographic memories or the ability to do math like a freaking calculator. There are people who are autistic savants. Those sorts of people already exist. The only thing the MCU really changes is the scale. So, if you're so worried about this in the context of the MCU, I hate to break it to you, but real life is also hell by your definition. Or haven't you ever met a young, talented person who is talented beyond their years? Because there's a lot of them. Superpowers or no freaking superpowers. Moving on. Banana.
Give me a second, Ahsoka. I'll read that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But impact the lives of others in profound and far-reaching ways. There's probably a more succinct way to phrase that. And the fact that all these people with supernatural abilities have been gifted them from many different sources makes it even more troubling.
Say what you want about that other reality, the one with Vox International and Seven. It might be horrifying, but at least there's only one thing to worry about. Compound V. No magic.
I withhold my rant on that because we would be here all day.
Okay, hold on. So, Storytelling Gaming. Not everyone is going to have the powers of a superhero. Not everyone would be considered a superhero. Some would be heroes. It would basically, Marvel Universe would basically be like My Hero Academia universe. meaning pretty much everyone has the potential to be a hero or have anything that they can do. The baby is born with limitless potential.
Well, the difference there, Ahsoka, is quirks in My Hero Academia are genetic. In the Marvel universe, there are at least two categories of quote unquote superpower that are learned skills: magic and science. So it doesn't really work. You can have this is why I made the point earlier about you can have people who would have superpowers but would choose not to be superheroes. You'd have people who would just use their powers to be really good at whatever their day job was or whatever their hobby was, or you'd have people who would treat magic like a religion or something.
I know it's just still even in My Hero Academia, there's superheroes who have just learned skills.
Yeah, to be fair, I didn't know that. I thought all quirks were genetic. But then again, I mostly just go from what people have told me about My Hero Academia, which is why I don't really care that much about it. Because to me, genetic powers are the lamest kind. Learned skills are always better.
I mean, some people have genetic abilities that they aren't really. I mean, there's this character called Eraserhead that if he looks at you, he turns off your power. But he's also a skilled martial artist, acrobatic. So
that I did know, Ahsoka. I did know that some people whose parents have quirks don't have quirks. I was just saying that for me, powers that are dependent on genetics are kind of lame. I prefer if at least some of the powers are learned skills. So there's that.
anyway,
And in particular with regards to this guy's argument, it completely ruins his argument that there are people whose powers, quote unquote, are the result of learned skills. Because even if you're a magic user who will never rise to the level of Doctor Strange, you still have there still is a threshold of what I would call basic magic competency. And even if you're a scientist who will never rise to the level of a Tony Stark, in a world with Stark tech and enough gimmicks, you can make do with that. I mean, look at Mysterio. That's why most of my argument has revolved around people who aren't enhanced or genetically gifted. I was going mostly with people who, because one of his major arguments was if you don't innately have powers, then you're shit out of luck in the MCU. And the fact that at least two categories of powers are learned makes that a lie, or at least a mistake.
okay. Moving on.
Yep. Moving on. Banana.
No aliens, no interdimensional travel. And while Homelander might be a psychopath, at least there's only one of them, and your chances of running into him are essentially non-existent.
Nothing out of my face.
Oh, right. I keep forgetting I did run into them at Dragon Con a few years ago. Or was I? Oh, right. Even in the grim darkness of the far future.
Again, the nihilism. This is where I lost all patience with this guy, because he is so predisposed towards apathy and nihilism that he doesn't even think of ways around it in universe. Like he doesn't approach anything as a practical problem. It's, oh, things I don't understand exist, therefore it's an existential nightmare. Which again, I don't want to play the projection card, but that does tell me that this person probably doesn't cope well with things they don't understand.
God, that's so sad. In every universe where there is heroes, there's going to be people without powers who just aren't heroes. Anyone in the ECU can become a hero. Anyone in the Marvel universe can become a hero or villain or just a vigilante. Anyone in any universe where humans exist can be trained to be able to match some of the most genetic beings in their world. Hell, you had this pre-World War II with so-called perfect athletes of the Germans being beaten by someone who would call the extreme opposite of who they would someone they would call
Yeah,
the
the
extreme
the
opposite.
Jesse Owens phenomena.
Yeah, but yeah, kind of depressing if you really look at the world this way, especially like in a superhero world. That cut out.
Yeah. I got the
Uh,
word depressing, and then everything after that was garbled.
when you look at a superhero world and see it as this like terrible place.
Yeah, it tells me that this guy probably wouldn't cope very well with anything he doesn't understand, which
In real life,
is
you have people who you
go ahead.
paused, so I thought you were done. I was gonna read the thing Sophie just posted. Even in
Mm.
real life, you have people who are thought to be perfect, like be beaten by someone who has trained hard.
Well, there's that, and then there's the variety. Then there's the cream of the crop, which is someone who was naturally perfect, quote unquote, who actually didn't rest on their laurels and decided to develop their skills to the highest degree, and then became the top 1% of 1%. Because for every genetically perfect person who's lazy, for every 100 or so genetically perfect person who's lazy, you will get the occasional genetically perfect person who applies themselves just as much as the imperfect but dedicated person, and they become the top 1% of 1%.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. Banana.
Banana.
There is a foundation. That foundation might be horrifying beyond the capacity for rational thought. It might far exceed even the darkest aspects of Earth 616 to an exponential degree, but you know what you're getting. Hostile Xenos and the corruption of the war. There is at least some level of certainty in what might annihilate humanity. In 616,
I'm sorry. The fact that he's saying Warhammer 40K is at least
Is less nihilistic than the 1999 universe, and no, I'm not letting that go. Again, I think this boils down back to his worldview. He simply doesn't believe that there's any possible way that someone can do anything about something they can't control or can't understand. And I hate to be this asshole. Actually, no, I kind of love being this asshole. But in the Marvel Universe, as in every universe, it seems, the correct answer, my nihilistic hipster friend, is the gamer's credo. Get good, scrub. Don't just sit there nihilistically bewailing the lot life handed you. Figure out something you're good at, or at least can be fairly competent at, and refine that skill, bitch. And by the way, this is coming from a person with spastic diplegic cerebral palsy who's 5'4". So if I can look at the way life, the cards life handed me, and at least find a decent 3-card a decent 3-card hand, you certainly can, because I'm fairly certain you don't have any particular physical disabilities that would actually impede you. But again, short version, gamer's credo, get good, scrub. And the fact that you find the idea of being forced to develop a skill less nihilistic than the universe of Warhammer 40k kind of says more about you than it does about the world. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Banana.
Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Vampires, mutants, interdimensional despots, it could be anything. Because in Earth 616, every year, every month, and every day is gradually turning into January 18th, 1871, which to me at least makes it the worst place to be alive.
Again, that's only assuming everyone on Earth is a MSM news junkie, which most of the events in the MCU are not that worth getting upset about, and the 5 or 6 of them that are, you can do something about. You can develop a skill, whether it be a scientific one or a magical one in the MCU, and or you can find a niche within like the superhero economy, again, like the Edna Mode style thing. Be the one that designs the super suits or something. Or hell, become a physics professor and do what Selvig does. Like, there are a lot of options, and it's not that uncertain. Like, you can broadly group everything in any given comic book universe down into technology, genetics like mutation, or magic / the supernatural. Once you get it through your head that those 3 categories of things exist, it's really not that jarring.
So we are gonna skip over the video we were gonna watch because I think it's
but we'll save it for another day.
Yeah. But we are going to cover something that is somewhat topical.
Mm-hmm.
That the final trailer of the Flash movie.
Mm-hmm. Batnana.
Yes, I was checking to see if it was coming through, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to. Yeah, Batman. Fuck it.
Hi.
I love you.
Thank you. Talk to you in Mr. Way. Oh, please don't cry.
I'm intruder now, Barry.
So you're saying?
I sort of don't. I sort of find it somewhat disingenuous to find someone screaming the Flash's name, because even excluding all the shit Ezra Miller has done IRL, this version of the Flash was never that well liked. People made fun of him all the time, even before we realized what Ezra Miller was getting up to as a result of it. Like, people were calling him Autistic Flash, people were calling him Twink Flash. I heard him being called Sheldon Cooper Flash. I heard him being called... Huh?
Ironically, I think the actor who played Sheldon Cooper would actually have been a better fit.
Probably, actually. Jim Parsons is a pretty decent actor within his sort of quirky range.
Yeah, he's really good. I saw him in Hidden Figures.
I've only seen him, I think, in the animated movie Home, excluding the episodes of Big Bang Theory that I've seen.
Right. Yeah. He voiced in Home. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, he was the alien in Home.
Well, they have a lot of different vocal range there for Sheldon Cooper. So, but
I don't know. I think he was kind of doubling down on Sheldon's fish out of waterness for that, but oh well.
That was kind of the movie. So,
Mhm.
but I still hate the costume. I've already given my Ezra Miller Flash just weird. Yeah, Ahsoka. Yeah. Not even a fun type of weird either.
No, he's not like a Johnny Depp style quirky or a Tilda Swinton style androgynous to the point of being unusual. It's it's weird in a kind of in an annoying sort of way. Like he's the kid who thinks he's the class clown, but everyone really just wishes he would shut the fuck up.
I know that. I knew someone like that. I don't remember the name. But I remember someone like that in school. A lot of people like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, I knew of 3 people like that in high school. One of which was once dating a friend of mine, and we're all fairly certain he was constantly stoned.
Right. So the thing I was going to say was, I've said it before, but I hate this Flash costume just because it doesn't. It feels so generic, but also it feels like most of it is like the practical suit itself was replaced with CGI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just.
They needed to streamline it more to focus on the running aspect, but whatever.
Well, that will just feel like it just looks so bland too.
Yeah, if anything, it should be really like sleek and skin tight. If anything,
I think that's what they were going for, but it didn't come off of that.
Yeah, it's too bulky and armored to come off that way.
I wouldn't even say that. It's too rubbery, I think.
See, I think it comes off as plasticky. I don't think it comes off as rubber. I think it comes off as plastic.
Either way, it's not a good look.
No, it's not. It's bad. It's very, very bad.
I mean,
it is probably the worst Flash design they could have come up with.
Honestly, the CW, as much as it has flaws in its writing, the later Flash costumes in the show worked really well. I mean, Skin Tight would reveal something a lot of girls might not like to see, as it was revealed in Johnson.
I mean, they don't. It doesn't have to be quite that form fitting.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, given that they're supposed to be designing for a speedster whose power is that he is, super fast, they should have focused on the Flash suit being as aerodynamic as possible and as sleek as possible. Because, that would be necessary for a speedster suit.
Also, again, the color palette just feels so fucking just so devoid of anything. Like, my God, it's a comic book movie.
Would it kill you to up the color contrast and saturation just the teeniest bit, you assholes?
Okay, even Kick-Ass, as it is, I guess you can make a point, this argument of it being a superhero parody. I guess it is. Mm-hmm. It at least had fucking color. Like, it was styled like a fucking comic book.
Yeah, we've Brainstorm and I have both been over this many, many dozens of times now. But dear Hollywood, you've had access to color film and color cinematic technology since 1938. You'd think you'd be better at using it by now.
Also, I want to say, like, none of this feels creative. Like, when you're going for, like, honestly, and I've seen someone do this, like, there's a YouTuber called Superframe who's actually pitched a Flash movie.
Mm-hmm.
take inspiration from the Speed Racer live action movie that came out a while ago. That had
That had an amazing color scheme. Yeah, the one the Wachowskis did.
Yeah, I like that movie, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. Like, I think it's a good movie. I enjoyed it.
Wasn't it what ended up in there being a Speed Racer cartoon on Nicktoons Network for a while?
Next Generation, right? Next Generation.
Yeah, because I want to say they greenlit that mostly because the movie was coming out, and it was really good.
I don't know when it came out, but maybe. I also want to, but I also wanted to make mention of like it's like the kinetic and like the motion and the energy that came with that movie, like with the racing scenes and stuff, like some of the Flash movies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm just not getting the sense in
The visual style was also really amazing in that too.
That's also why I brought it up. You know.
Yeah, but yeah, like guys, you're making a comic book movie. It should be more colorful than this. Also, speaking of things being derivative of other things, let's face it, this is just Batman No Way Home. Like everyone knows it at this point. You're just doing with Batman what they did with Spider-Man in No Way Home. And we all know no one is here for Ezra Miller's version of the Flash. You'd probably get more cheers if Grant Gustin showed up at some point in this movie than you would from Ezra Miller.
Anyway, Kelly.
Yeah. Bet Nana.
Could travel back in time. But Bruce, I can fix things. I can save people. I can save my mom. I can save your parents. We can also destroy everything.
Why do I think we're going to get a very good version of Batfleck in this terrible movie?
Yep. And it's not going to matter because he's only going to be in it for 5 minutes and then it'll be irrelevant.
It sucks because, again, it's like the Henry Cavill situation.
So much potential, so many failures and failed attempts to make things work.
Yeah, God. And I'm not feeling anything. And like, if this is taking place at Flashpoint, and I remember watching the Flashpoint, Justice League, the Flashpoint Paradox movie, you know, the animated one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I felt things when I watched that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has heart behind it. This doesn't feel like it has. It's just being pushed out. That's it. You know.
And what's worse is I was staggered by how many people forgave everything DC has done wrong, everything Ezra Miller's done wrong, everything that everything that James Gunn in his prelude to his 10 years done wrong, all because Michael Keaton came in and jangled some keys in front of everyone's faces. And it bothers me.
No, it's another unit. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, it's Ahsoka, because they're asking in this shot why that car is not even a 90s car. This is another, or not the, they're fucking up so much, basically.
Yeah, they're trying to do like an early 2000s period piece because younger Barry and stuff, but yeah, bollocks to that entire thing. You can't even do period pieces correctly, guys.
I thought the Flash was in his 20s, not his 30s.
I don't know. I think he's supposed to be 25 here, from what I hear. So, and younger Barry is supposed to be like 18. So, Yeah, I guess like 2010s would be when this is set, maybe.
What explains Zod? To be fair.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Although the fact that Henry isn't here and you're still using his Zod, and meanwhile Supergirl is standing there. Again, it's just, are you even trying to avoid rubbing salt in people's wounds, DC?
I doubt they can. Anyway, moving on.
Well, they'll care when it negatively impacts the box office, but oh well.
Batman.
Bet now.
So how was it this week? How's school? School was good. This is mad trippy. Dude, this is catastrophic.
I will say I dig the music, which is Pink Floyd's Time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just I don't. Nothing here. There's nothing.
Yeah, sadly, this is the best trailer, and it still feels off.
Also, CGI here, like again, say what you want about Zack Snyder. We've said plenty about him over the years, but at least he had a good visual style.
Yeah. Everything else was misplaced to hell and back, but he was good at visual style. That's why I think he should have been a screenwriter instead of a director.
Or director of cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So many fucking I don't know. Like I don't get this movie at all. Like it's so empty. I mean,
And my theory is that younger Barry is gonna wind up being Zoom, because why not?
I think interestingly.
When older Barry ends up finagling things so that he still gets his powers, younger Barry is gonna become Zoom because he doesn't want to give up his mom, probably. Then again, maybe I'm doing the backseat writing thing, and the plot will be even stupider here, because that would actually make some kind of sense.
Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Banana.
Yep, Batnana.
This world must die.
I'm not gonna lose her again. It's not Clark.
My name is Kara. I will help you.
Interesting group.
No.
Again, it's weird how she's styled after a daughter of like an Elseworlds version of Superman, and Elseworlds version of Superman and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, she's styled after the I believe it was the shit, now I can't remember. Act of God timeline. And yet she's called Kara.
What's weird is I remember I only knew that because I was watching one of those videos that talks about like the Superman family.
Mm-hmm.
Like family trees.
Mm-hmm.
Ahsoka, well, I think they were adapting it. I don't think they're like keeping true to anything on the Flashpoint paradox story.
The only thing they're keeping from Flashpoint is this allows them to basically hit the reboot button.
Yeah.
It's their get out of continuity errors free card. That's the whole reason why they're going forward with it, even because they would rather have an in-universe explanation as to why the reboot happens and why James Gunn takes over.
Again, if I was writing the Flash movie, and I'm sort of doing this now, it would be an adaptation of the Flash of Two Worlds instead,
Hmm.
where it's Barry Allen and Jay Garrick.
Hmm.
Granted, my version is a little different and they are still keeping Ezra Miller the groomer.
Mm.
Are they? I don't know. I hear so many conflicting things about that.
I think this will be his last movie, but it was still stupid not to at least they could have done like have Grant Gustin come in and deal with the transition because multiverse, but yeah, it's
I mean, to be fair, he's been playing the Flash on TV for about decades. So I think.
and again, they're not even heavily focusing on the Flash in this movie. It's technically a Flash movie, but it's Batman No Way Home, and we all know it. Like they only care about the Flash because the Flash in this instance has the power to reboot the universe, and they therefore get a in-universe reboot button.
Anyway, shall we?
Yeah, moving on. Batnana.
Wait, he's Batman? You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. Oh, this rips!
And see, this is how I know that Michael Keaton is there just for jangling keys and member berries, because they didn't bother to replicate any of Tim Burton's actual designs or cinematography. If this is supposed to be the '89 Batman universe, then you should have had Tim Burton come back and direct some of the scenes, or at least have someone mimic his style. But you're not. This isn't actually the Tim Burton Batman. This is just a different version of Batman altogether. Keaton, which is just lame. Brainstormer. Brainstormer. I think, Brainstormer, that you have technical difficulties again. Because there was a glitch just a second ago. And now I can't hear you at all. Okay. Did you reboot?
Yeah. Sorry
Okay.
for that. My internet just crapped out like so bad.
Yep. I could tell because I couldn't hear you,
I
and
was
the screen flickered.
I was trying to fix the damn thing. You cut out like right in the middle of what you were talking about. So,
Okay, yeah. What I was saying was this is why you can tell that Michael Keaton being there is just jangled keys, because they didn't make any effort to replicate Tim Burton's cinematography or the aesthetics of the '89 movies, because what we as fans want is to see a return of Tim Burton and Michael Keaton's Batman. But what we have instead is a completely different version of Batman in a completely different world than he previously was in, that just so happens to be being played by the same actor as Michael Keaton. But it took two to make the '89 Batman in the form of Michael Keaton and Tim Burton. Tim Burton's Gotham was so iconic that it went on to inspire Paul Dini and Bruce Timm's dark deco aesthetic. But here we have the same actor playing Batman, but we don't have him playing Batman in the same world. This isn't Tim Burton's Gotham. This is a completely different incarnation of Batman, which in all honesty should be Thomas Wayne, but isn't because reasons. That just so happens to be also being played by Michael Keaton. That's how you can tell this is just jangling keys.
yeah, again, like there's nothing visually that interests me either.
Mm-hmm.
No style. It's just a movie.
Nope. We're ripping off No Way Home in the hopes that we can get an in-universe explanation for why we're rebooting things. Please love us like you did No Way Home. That's basically the logic behind this.
Yeah. Anyway, that was
Bat Nana.
Batman.
We're in uncharted territory. We try not to die.
Are you ready?
Ready. Let's go.
And see, no one who knows anything about Michael Keaton's Batman would be stupid enough to make him be around in the daytime. Or if they did, they would at least mute the daytime colors or stylize them in such a way that it didn't look out of place.
I think the main issue is there's no shadows. You know, like if there are, they're super faded to the point you can't tell.
Yeah. It's not only is it daylight, but it's the brightest possible daylight, which is the last place you want Michael Keaton's incarnation of Batman to exist. If you care about like shot composition or style at all.
Yeah, sunrise or sunset, I think would be best.
Or again, you could mute or play around with the light in such a way that it didn't look terrible. Like, but never mind, I suppose. Batman.
No, Uber. Oh, Zach.
Yeah, the worst part about this is Ezra Miller has no charisma.
None. In fact, he has inverse charisma. That's why people constantly made fun of him as Autistic Flash, Twink Flash, Hipster Flash, Gay Flash, etc. He looks like the kind of kid who is so smarmy that you want to punch him in the face.
Like you.
Shut up. I make it look good. Ezra Miller is just annoying and creepy.
Fair point. Yeah, again, like honestly, the best, like if you still want to do a multiverse Flash story, again, Flash of Two Worlds.
Honestly, you
I mean-
also probably could have done Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then Flash wouldn't have to be the main character.
That takes a lot of building up, to be fair.
Well, since they're half-assing it anyway, why? And the Berlanti verse already did it once. They already have a template to use.
Yeah, I just want to see Jake Garrick in live action just once, just because he's cool.
Also, Ezra probably should have been playing Wally West from the get-go, because he's nothing like Barry Allen.
Yeah, no. That's a weird thing that people have been doing lately is like putting traits of Wally West Flash into Barry Allen Flash.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a weird thing that I've noticed a lot of people.
Yeah, it's weird to me that they even because Jay Garrick is Golden Age Flash, Barry Allen is Silver Age Flash, and then the modern Flash was always Wally West. I think even in the DC animated universe, the one played by Michael Rosenbaum was supposed to be Wally, because a few times I remember him being called Wally.
Yeah. Yeah, they just made this movie to make it, really. Like, it was just on a slate, and there's no path.
They literally only kept it on the schedule to give themselves an excuse for rebooting everything.
I mean, it doesn't help that there was so, like, even before they were canceled in DCU, they were so many directors and script writers were coming in and out of that project.
Yeah, there was no direction, and there were so many continuity errors and world building errors that it was barely even half baked to begin with, and then you were just barely getting something resembling a world together around the time Black Adam came out, and most people, I think, were happy with that, and then you took a hard left turn into, nope, we're hard resetting it. But we were starting to really enjoy the soft reboot. Can't you just leave it? No, we have to hard reboot it for some reason.
And with that, folks, I want to say goodbye. Adios, aloha, avidase, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom and fuck off. I have to go eat something.